Welcome to my humble little channel. If you're looking for something to listen to before bed or a chilling story for tonight, you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. Let's reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. Thank you for your support and enjoy the stories. My name is Thomas Brennan, and what I'm about to tell you happened during the autumn of 2013 in Cedarville, Ohio. A town so small that our police department consisted of exactly 4 officers, 2 patrol vehicles, and a dispatch system that still used analog radio frequencies because the town council couldn't justify the expense of upgrading to digital. I was 31 years old that October, young enough to still believe that good police work meant following procedure and trusting your partners. Old enough to know better, as it turned out. The Friday before homecoming weekend, I drew the 12 to 12 swing shift, noon to midnight, the slot nobody wanted because it meant missing dinner with family and arriving home too wired to sleep properly. Cedarville was the kind of place where the biggest excitement on a typical Friday night was breaking up underage drinking parties at the quarry or writing speeding tickets to teenagers showing off for their dates. We'd had exactly 1 homicide in the previous 8 years, and that was old Jerome Watts shooting his brother-in-law over a property dispute that had festered since the Carter administration. My partner that night was Dennis Reed, a 15-year veteran who'd grown up in Cedarville and knew every resident by first name. Reed had a face like worn leather, all creases and sunspots from years of working outdoor details at county fairs and football games. He coached Little League in the spring and volunteered at the fire department's pancake breakfast every Veterans Day. When my daughter Annie turned 3 that past July, Reed had shown up at the birthday party with a stuffed elephant bigger than she was, and he'd spent an hour on his hands and knees giving pony rides to a dozen shrieking children. That's the man I thought I knew. The shift started unremarkably. Reed took the south roads, Highway 33 through the farmland and the industrial park near the county line, while I stayed at the station working through a stack of incident reports from the previous week. Our station house was a converted gas station from the 1950s, and the heating system had never worked correctly. In October, the building maintained a steady 58 degrees that no amount of space heaters could overcome. I wore 2 sweaters under my uniform and drank coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through a gym sock. At 9:17 p.m., dispatch crackled to life. Our dispatcher, Marge Holloway, was 63 and had been working the night board since before I was born. Her voice had the texture of gravel, roughened by 40 years of unfiltered cigarettes. Unit 2. We've got an anonymous report of suspicious activity at the old Miller Dairy facility. Caller reported seeing lights moving inside the main building. Couldn't get a name or callback number. They hung up before I could get anything else. I set down my coffee, already reaching for my coat. The Miller Dairy had been abandoned since 2003, when a silo collapse killed 2 workers and bankrupted the family that had run the operation for 3 generations. The property sat on 40 acres of county land, surrounded by a chain-link fence that teenagers had cut through so many times that the gaps were now permanent fixtures. Kids went there to drink, to smoke, to lose their virginity in the rusting hulks of delivery trucks. We'd probably responded to calls about the dairy 100 times in the past decade. And it was always the same story. Some kids, some beer, maybe some minor vandalism. Copy that, Marge. I'll check it out. You want me to raise Dennis? Have him swing back from the South District? I glanced at the duty roster. Reed was out near the county line, a good 30 minutes away even with lights and sirens. No need. It's probably just the usual crowd. I'll handle it and call if I need backup. 10-4. Be careful out there, Tommy. The drive to the Miller Dairy took 23 minutes. I could have made it in 15, but something about the caller's demeanor had stuck with me. Marge had mentioned the voice shook. In my 4 years with Cedarville PD, I'd learned to distinguish between different types of anonymous callers. There were the busybodies reporting on neighbors they didn't like, their voices tight with righteous indignation. There were the teens making prank calls, barely suppressing giggles. And then there were the frightened callers, the ones who'd seen something that genuinely disturbed them. This had been one of those. I drove with my window down despite the October cold, letting the night air keep me alert. The highway out of town was dark, lined on both sides by cornfields that had already been harvested. The stubble stood in neat rows, creating a repetitive pattern that played tricks on your peripheral vision if you stared too long. A harvest moon hung low and bloated on the eastern horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. The dairy facility appeared gradually, announced first by the broken sign still hanging from rusted chains at the property entrance. Miller Family Dairy, serving Ohio since 1947. The letters had faded to ghost impressions, and someone had spray-painted over them in dripping red letters, Dead Zone. Below that, a more recent edition in sloppy black paint. Enter at your own risk. I cut my headlights and engine about 100 yards from the main gate, letting the cruiser coast on momentum. This was standard procedure when approaching a potential trespassing situation. You didn't want to announce your arrival and give kids time to scatter into the surrounding fields. I'd learned this the hard way during my first year on the force, when I'd rolled up with lights blazing and watched a group of teenagers vanish into the corn like startled deer. The gate hung open, one half twisted completely off its hinges and lying in the weeds. I grabbed my flashlight from the charger mount, a heavy maglite that could double as a club if necessary, and stepped out into the October night. The smell hit me immediately. Old places develop their own particular odors, a combination of decay and abandonment and the slow work of nature reclaiming human structures. But the Miller Dairy had an additional layer to its scent profile. Industrial cleaning chemicals mixed with biological rot, the ghost of 10,000 gallons of milk that had spoiled in the tanks during those final chaotic days after the silo collapse. Even after a decade, on humid nights you could catch whiffs of something sour and organic that made your stomach turn. Tonight wasn't humid, but the smell was stronger than I'd ever noticed before. Underneath the familiar industrial decay there was something else, sharp and chemical, like the disinfectant they use in hospital operating rooms, and below that, fainter but unmistakable, the copper tang of blood. I keyed my shoulder radio, keeping my voice low. Unit 2 to dispatch. I'm on site at Miller Dairy. Gates open, no vehicles visible from the entrance. Going to do a visual sweep of the perimeter before entering the main structure. Copy, Unit 2. Be advised, we've got weather moving in from the west. Storm system's supposed to hit around midnight. I acknowledged and started forward, playing my flashlight beam across the complex. The dairy had been a substantial operation in its prime. 3 main buildings connected by covered walkways, a towering silo that still leaned at an angle that made you uncomfortable just looking at it, and various outbuildings for equipment storage and administrative offices. Most of the windows were broken now, dark eyes staring out at nothing. The moonlight gave everything a silvery, unreal quality, like I was walking through a photograph instead of an actual place. My boots crunched on gravel and broken glass. Standard police procedures said I should wait for backup before entering any condemned structure, especially one this large. But I'd been here dozens of times before, always finding nothing more threatening than teenagers drinking warm beer and trying to scare each other with ghost stories about the workers who died in the silo collapse. I was still thinking about those ghost stories when I stepped through the gap in the fence and into the main courtyard. The diary's central building loomed ahead, a 2-story concrete block structure that had once housed the main processing floor. My flashlight beam swept across the loading dock where trucks had once backed up to receive their loads of fresh milk. The bay doors had been torn off years ago, leaving rectangular black mouths that seemed to breathe cold air into the night. I'd taken maybe 30 steps toward the nearest bay when my radio crackled with a burst of static so loud I jumped. "Brennan, can you, location?" The voice cut in and out, distorted by interference. I keyed my mic. "Unit 2, say again? You're breaking up." Nothing but dead air. Cell phone coverage out here was non-existent. The nearest tower was 6 miles away, and the dairy sat in a natural bowl of land that blocked most signals. Radio communication was supposed to be more reliable, but the old analog system had its quirks. Sometimes the metal structures of the dairy complex created interference patterns that scrambled transmissions. I tried my cell phone anyway. No signal. Not even 1 bar. The smart thing to do would have been to walk back to the cruiser, drive to higher ground, and call for Reed to meet me before proceeding. But I was 31 and still believed I was invincible, still thought that bad things happened to other cops in other towns. Cedarville was safe. Cedarville was home. The worst thing I'd ever drawn my weapon for here was a rabid raccoon behind the Methodist church, so I kept walking. The interior of the processing building was a maze of stainless steel machinery that had been left to rust. Milking equipment hung from the ceiling like mechanical spiders, their rubber tubes dried and cracked. The concrete floor was littered with debris, broken equipment, empty spray paint cans, liquor bottles, the accumulated detritus of a decade's worth of teenage trespassing. My flashlight beam created harsh shadows that seemed to move and shift at the edge of my vision. The building was divided into several large rooms, each one flowing into the next through wide doorways that had once been fitted with clear plastic curtains for temperature control. Those curtains were long gone, leaving open passages that created strange acoustic effects. Every footstep echoed multiple times, making it sound like several people were walking through the darkness. I cleared the first 2 rooms methodically, checking corners and dark spaces where someone might hide. Nothing but rats. I heard them scurrying away from my approach, saw their eyes reflecting red in the flashlight beam. The 3rd room had been some kind of administrative area, with rusted filing cabinets tipped over and papers scattered everywhere. Water damage had turned most of the documents into papier-mâché, creating sculptural forms that looked vaguely human in the uncertain light. It was in the 4th room, what had once been the main processing floor, that I found the hand. I'd been sweeping my flashlight across the floor, watching my footing because the concrete was slick with a decade's worth of accumulated moisture and mold. The beam caught something that didn't fit the pattern of debris. Something too pink, too fleshy, too deliberately placed. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It looked like a prop, something from a Halloween store. The kind of realistic but not quite replica you'd use to prank your friends. It was positioned palm up, fingers slightly curled, as if reaching for something just out of grasp. Then I saw the ragged end where it had been severed just above the wrist. The edges weren't clean. This hadn't been done with a surgical blade. The tissue was torn, the bone splintered, like someone had used a dull saw and considerable force. Blood had pooled around it, still glistening wetly in my flashlight beam. Fresh. This was very fresh. My training kicked in. I keyed my radio, trying to keep my voice steady. Unit 2 to dispatch. I need backup at Miller Dairy immediately. I paused, my mouth suddenly dry. I've found human remains. Appears to be recent. Static answered me. I tried again. With the same result, I pulled out my cell phone on the off chance I might catch a signal. Still nothing. I thought about running back to the cruiser, but something made me stay. The hand wasn't alone. There had to be more. A body. A victim who might still be alive somewhere in this building, bleeding out while I wasted time trying to get a radio signal. That's when I noticed the hand wasn't quite empty. There was something strapped to the wrist, a black nylon band with a rectangular shape attached to it. I crouched down, keeping my distance but angling my flashlight for a better view. It was a radio, not a civilian radio, but a police-issue Motorola, identical to the one clipped to my own belt. My stomach dropped. Every officer in Cedarville PD had been issued these radios 3 years ago, when the department finally had the budget to upgrade from the ancient units we'd been using. There were only 4 of them in circulation. I was wearing one. The chief had one. Reed had one. And the 4th was supposed to be in the equipment locker at the station, serving as a spare. As I stared at the radio strapped to the severed hand, it crackled to life. Brennan. The voice was distorted by static, but recognizable. Male. Calm. Where the hell are you? I grabbed my own radio, but the channel was dead. No carrier signal, no background hiss, nothing. The voice was only coming from the radio on the hand. Brennan? The voice repeated. There was a quality to it that I couldn't quite place, something familiar that danced just out of reach of my memory. You need to answer me, Brennan. This isn't a game. I drew my service weapon, a Glock 22 that suddenly felt inadequate for whatever situation I'd walked into. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing through possibilities, none of them good. Someone had killed someone recently enough that the blood was still wet. They'd taken a police radio from the victim, and they knew I was here. I needed backup. I needed Reed. I needed to get the hell out of this building and call for every available unit in the county, but I couldn't leave without knowing if there was a victim still alive somewhere in this labyrinth. I holstered my weapon long enough to pull out my cell phone and send a text message to dispatch, praying it might go through even though the call function showed no signal. Sometimes texts could squeeze through when voice calls couldn't. Officer needs assistance. Miller Dairy. Found human remains. Radio not working. Send all units. The message sat there with a spinning circle, trying to send. I pocketed the phone and drew my weapon again. The blood trail led deeper into the building. A series of smears and drips that looked like someone, or something, had been dragged across the concrete. The pattern was distinctive. 2 parallel drag marks punctuated by drips, as if the heels had been scoring the ground while the body was hauled forward by the shoulders. I followed, every sense heightened to the point where I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The building was never silent. There were always sounds. The creak of metal contracting in the October cold, the scratch of rat claws on concrete, the whisper of wind through broken windows. But underneath all of that, I became aware of another sound. A low mechanical hum, like a generator or refrigeration unit running somewhere nearby. The blood trail led me through 2 more rooms and into a corridor I hadn't known existed. The flashlight beam showed walls that had once been painted institutional green but were now covered in graffiti and water stains that looked like rust-colored tears. The corridor was narrow, claustrophobic, with doors on both sides leading to what had probably been storage rooms or offices. Most of the doors hung open, revealing empty spaces picked clean by scavengers and time. But one door, near the end of the corridor, was closed. A brand new padlock hung from the hasp, the brass catch still shiny and free of rust. The mechanical humming was louder here. And there was a smell, that hospital disinfectant odor I'd noticed outside. But stronger now, almost overpowering. I approached the door carefully. Weapon raised, every muscle in my body tensed. The blood trail ended at the threshold, a smeared handprint on the doorframe suggesting someone had tried to brace themselves, had tried to resist being pulled through. The padlock was a problem. I didn't have bolt cutters in the cruiser. We'd never needed them in Cedarville. I could shoot the lock off, but that would announce my presence to anyone else who might be in the building. And the memory of that voice on the radio, "Where the hell are you, Brennan?" suggested that someone was definitely in the building, and they knew exactly who I was. I tried my radio one more time. Unit 2 to any unit, I'm in the main processing building at Miller Dairy. I've found evidence of a violent crime and need immediate backup. If anyone can hear this, please respond. Silence. Then, from somewhere deeper in the building, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze, the scrape of metal on concrete, rhythmic and deliberate, getting closer. I switched off my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, trying to become invisible in the darkness. My eyes adjusted slowly, finding the faint illumination from the moon streaming through distant windows. The sound continued. Scrape, pause, like someone dragging something heavy. A figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. Backlit by the moonlight, I couldn't make out features, only a silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like coveralls or a work suit. They were pulling something behind them, and even though I couldn't see clearly, I knew what it was. Another body? Another victim. The figure stopped, as if sensing my presence. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then a flashlight clicked on, the beam sweeping down the corridor, searching. I had seconds to decide, announce myself as police and hope the figure surrendered, stay hidden and watch, or run. The decision was made for me when the flashlight beam found me. "Officer Brennan," a voice called out. Not the voice from the radio, this one was different. Smooth, cultured, with a hint of amusement. "I wondered when you'd arrive. You're actually slightly ahead of schedule, most impressive." The figure walked toward me, dragging whatever they'd been hauling. In the darkness and confusion, with adrenaline flooding my system, my mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Then the figure stepped into a patch of moonlight, and I recognized him. Harold Vance, Cedarville's funeral director. Harold Vance was 63 years old, rail-thin, and moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent decades working with the dead. He'd buried my grandmother 5 years earlier, and I remembered being struck by how gentle he'd been with my grieving mother. How his soft voice and careful manners had brought a measure of comfort to an otherwise unbearable day. He was wearing white coveralls, the kind that painters or cleanroom technicians use. In the uncertain light, I could see they were spattered with dark stains, recent stains that hadn't had time to dry completely. His normally neat silver hair was disheveled, and he'd shaved off his eyebrows entirely, giving his face a strange, unfinished quality that made him look less human and more like a medical mannequin. "Mr. Vance?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I need you to stop right there and show me your hands." He smiled, not a nervous smile or a guilty smile, but something closer to satisfaction. "Of course, officer. Though I should mention that my hands are sterile at the moment, and I'd rather not compromise that if possible." He raised both hands, palms forward. He was wearing latex gloves that gleamed wetly in the moonlight. I kept my weapon trained on him. "What are you doing here, Mr. Vance?" "Working," he said simply. "Same as you in a way. We both deal with bodies, Officer Brennan. The difference is that I've learned to see them as resources rather than tragedies." The shape he'd been dragging was definitely a body. I could see it now, wrapped in clear plastic sheeting. Through the translucent material, I could make out the silhouette of a human form. "I need you to step away from that body and put your hands behind your head." Vance cocked his head, considering. "I could do that, but then you'd have to decide what to do next, and I don't think you're going to like your options. The only option you have is to comply with a lawful order." "Is it lawful, though?" Vance's smile widened. You're here without backup, without a warrant, investigating a trespass call. You've found what appears to be evidence of a crime, but you don't actually know what crime has been committed. For all you know, I'm disposing of unclaimed remains from my funeral home, which, while ethically questionable, isn't actually illegal in the way you might think. My radio crackled again, and this time the voice was crystal clear. Tommy? It was Reed. Tommy, where are you? Marge said you went to the dairy. What's your status? I grabbed for my radio, relief flooding through me. Backup was here. Whatever nightmare I'd walked into, I wasn't alone anymore. Reed, I'm in the main building, Eastern Corridor. I've got a situation here. Vance is... I know where Vance is, Reed's voice interrupted. There was something off about his tone, too calm, too controlled. And I need you to listen to me very carefully, Tommy. Don't do anything stupid. The corridor seemed to tilt. What? Vance was still smiling, but now there was pity in his expression. You really didn't know, did you? Poor Officer Brennan. Poor honest, by-the-book Tommy Brennan. Footsteps echoed from somewhere behind me. I spun, trying to keep both Vance and the approaching sound in my sightline, which was impossible in the narrow corridor. My mind was racing, trying to process what was happening, trying to make sense of Reed's words. Dennis Reed appeared at the other end of the corridor, walking slowly, casually, his own weapon holstered. He looked tired. That was my first thought. He looked like a man who'd gone too many nights without proper sleep. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped with exhaustion that went bone deep. Hey, Tommy, he said quietly. Put the gun down. We need to talk. I kept my Glock trained on Vance, but my attention was divided now. Reed, what the hell is going on? Why did you tell me not to do anything stupid? This man is standing next to a dead body. There's a severed hand back in the main room with a police radio attached to it. I know, Reed said. That was mine. Lost it during a collection last month. Vance found it later, been meaning to give it back. Collection? The word felt alien in my mouth. Vance spoke up, his voice maddeningly calm. Officer Reed and I have a business arrangement, Officer Brennan. A very lucrative one as it happens. We identify candidates, people who won't be missed, or whose disappearance can be easily explained, and we harvest their organs for sale to private buyers. The demand for transplantable organs far exceeds the legal supply, you see. There's enormous money to be made in filling that gap. I stared at Reed, willing him to laugh, to tell me this was some kind of sick joke. But his face remained impassive, empty of everything except exhaustion. You're killing people, I said. You're murdering people and selling their organs. We're providing a service, Vance corrected gently. Every organ we harvest goes to someone who desperately needs it. Someone who would otherwise die waiting for the official transplant list to get around to them. We're saving lives, Officer Brennan. More lives than you've saved in your entire career, I'd wager. By taking lives, I shot back. By murdering innocent people. Reed finally showed some emotion. A flash of irritation crossing his face. Innocent? Tommy, the people we select are hardly innocent. Drug addicts, criminals, homeless drifters nobody would miss anyway. We're cleaning up the streets while making a profit. It's efficient. The hand, I said. Whose hand is that? Bradley Garrison, Vance said. 19 years old, overdosed on heroin in my preparation room 3 weeks ago. I hate waste, Officer Brennan. When young Mr. Garrison arrived already deceased, it seemed foolish not to make use of his organs. His heart went to a cardiac patient in Cincinnati, his liver to an alcoholic in Columbus who got a second chance at life. His kidneys are currently being transported to buyers in Cleveland. Even his corneas found a home. You cut him up. You're talking about a human being like he was spare parts. That's exactly what he was, Vance said. What we all are, really, if you strip away the sentimentality. The human body is a collection of organs and tissues that can be repurposed. I simply recognized that truth earlier than most people. I looked at Reed, searching for some sign of the man I thought I knew. How long have you been doing this? 4 years, he said quietly. Started small, just Vance disposing of bodies that showed up at his funeral home already dead. Then we realized there was more money in being proactive about procurement. We've done 11 so far, made almost $400,000. 11 people. My voice sounded hollow. You've murdered 11 people. 11 people who were already dying, Tommy. Addicts, terminal cases, people living on the street with no family, no future. We gave their deaths meaning. You gave their deaths profit, I corrected. You're serial killers with a profit motive. Vance shook his head sadly. Such crude terminology. We prefer to think of ourselves as facilitators. Middlemen in the great chain of— Shut up, I snapped. My mind was racing, trying to calculate odds, trying to figure out how to get out of this corridor alive. I was outnumbered. Reed was armed. Vance probably had weapons hidden somewhere on his person. And we were in the middle of an abandoned building with no cell signal and a radio system that apparently Reed could monitor and intercept. The hand with the radio. Reed had said he lost it during a collection, which meant he'd been here before, probably multiple times. This wasn't a random location. This was their regular killing ground. The body you're dragging, I said to Vance, trying to buy time. Who is it? Ah, that's actually why your timing is so unfortunate. Vance glanced down at the plastic-wrapped form. This is Jackson Merritt, 22 years old, worked at the gas station on Highway 33. You probably saw him there, tall kid, acne scars, always wearing a Buckeyes cap. I remembered him. He'd filled my tank 2 days ago, made small talk about the upcoming game. Jackson has had a very unfortunate addiction to methamphetamine, Vance continued. He also had an outstanding warrant for failure to appear on a possession charge. When he showed up at my funeral home tonight asking if I had any odd jobs he could do for quick cash, it seemed like Providence. I gave him something that I told him was high-grade methamphetamine. It was actually a very fast-acting paralytic. He was dead within minutes. God, I whispered. God, you're insane. Both of you are insane. We're pragmatic, Reed said. Tommy, you need to understand something. The money from this operation has kept Cedarville PD funded for 4 years. New equipment, better training, the body armor you're wearing right now, paid for with organ money. The upgraded radio system we've been requesting for years, that's next year's budget item, funded entirely by our extra income. You're using blood money to fund the police department. I'm using available resources to serve and protect this community, Reed shot back, anger finally showing through. Do you think the town council is going to approve budget increases? Do you think the state is going to send us more money? We make $40,000 a year, Tommy. $40,000 to put our lives on the line every single day. Vance and I found a way to supplement that income while simultaneously providing a valuable service to people who desperately need organs. It's win-win, except for the 11 people you've murdered. 11 people who were already circling the drain, Vance said dismissively. We simply accelerated their inevitable demise, and in doing so, we saved at least 30 lives. That's how many recipients have benefited from our organs. 30 people who would have died waiting for transplants. 30 families who didn't have to bury their loved ones. The mathematics are quite compelling if you think about it objectively. I couldn't listen to any more of this rational-sounding madness. Reed, put your hands behind your head. You're under arrest for murder. Both of you. Reed laughed. Actually laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Tommy, think. Really think. You're in an abandoned building with no backup, no radio contact, no cell signal. Nobody knows exactly where you are. If you try to arrest us, you'll just become victim number 12. Or, he paused significantly, you could be smart. You could join us. Join you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Split 3 ways instead of 2, Vance added. You'd be making an additional $60,000 a year or more. Think about what that could do for your family, Officer Brennan. Think about the college fund for little Annie. Think about finally being able to afford a decent house instead of that rental on Maple Street with the leaking roof. Think about security. They'd been planning this whole conversation, this whole situation. They'd been leading up to this moment, trying to recruit me. I'm a police officer, I said. I took an oath. So did I, Reed replied. And I'm keeping it. I'm protecting and serving this community, Tommy. I'm just doing it in a way the politicians and bureaucrats would never understand. Join us. Help us. We could use someone with your skills, your dedication, and you'd be rich enough to never worry about money again. For just a moment, and I'm ashamed to admit this, I actually considered it. $60,000 a year, Annie's college fund, a real house, financial security. All I had to do was look the other way while Reed and Vance continued their organ harvesting operation. Then I thought about Jackson Merritt, 22 years old, killed because he was an addict trying to make some quick money. I thought about Bradley Garrison, carved up on Vance's preparation table. I thought about 9 other victims whose names I didn't know. People who'd been murdered for their kidneys and hearts and livers. No, I said firmly, I'm not joining you, and I'm not letting you walk out of here. Reed's expression hardened. Then you're not walking out of here either, Tommy. I'm sorry, I really am. You're a good cop and a good man, but you're not smart enough to see the bigger picture. He reached for his weapon. Everything happened very fast and very slow at the same time. One of those moments where your perception of time becomes elastic, stretching seconds into hours. I saw Reed's hand move toward his holster, saw Vance reaching into his coveralls, pulling out something that glinted metal in the moonlight. Saw the corridor suddenly become a killing box with me at the center. Training took over. I pivoted, putting my back to the wall so I could cover both of them. My finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't," I warned. "Reed, don't do this." He drew his weapon anyway, but he didn't raise it immediately. There was hesitation in his movement, a fraction of a second where I could see him wrestling with the decision. We'd been partners for 3 years, friends. He'd bounced Annie on his knee at her birthday party. That hesitation saved my life. Vance was less conflicted. He lunged at me with what I could now see was a boning knife, the kind used in commercial kitchens and meat processing. The blade was easily 6 inches long and razor sharp. I fired once. The muzzle flash lit up the corridor like a strobe, burning after images into my vision. The shot went wide. I'd been aiming for center mass, but in the darkness and confusion, the bullet struck the concrete wall behind Vance and ricocheted with a sound like an angry hornet. Vance kept coming. The knife blade caught the edge of my body armor, scraped along the Kevlar vest, and then he was inside my guard, too close for me to bring the Glock to bear. His breath was hot on my face, smelling of peppermint and formaldehyde. We grappled, slamming against the wall. The impact knocked my flashlight from my belt, and it clattered to the floor, rolling in a crazy arc that sent shadows spinning. My gun hand was pinned between us, Vance's weight pressing my arm down. He was stronger than he looked, his thin frame hiding corded muscle and a feral strength born of desperation. The knife came up again. I caught his wrist with my free hand, holding the blade inches from my throat. We stayed locked in that position, trembling with effort. I could see my own reflection in his eyes, could see the moment when he realized he wasn't going to overpower me this way. He headbutted me instead. Pain exploded across my forehead. Stars burst in my vision. My grip on his wrist loosened for just a second, but a second was enough. The knife descended, aimed at my throat. A gunshot, not mine, rang out in the enclosed space. The sound was deafening, physically painful in the narrow corridor. Vance jerked, his eyes going wide. The knife wavered, then fell from his hands. He looked down at his chest, where a red flower was blooming across the white coveralls. Then he looked at me, confused, as if I'd betrayed him somehow. He collapsed, sliding down my body to crumple on the floor. I spun, bringing my Glock up, expecting to see Reed ready to finish what Vance had started. But Reed wasn't aiming at me. His weapon was pointed at the floor, smoke curling from the barrel. He was staring at Vance's body with an expression I couldn't read. Regret? Relief? Horror at what he'd just done? "Reed?" My voice was hoarse. He didn't look at me. "Go," he said quietly. "Get out of here, Tommy. Take Jackson's body if you want. Call the state police. Tell them everything. But leave now, while you still can." "I can't just." "You can and you will." Now he did look at me, and his eyes were full of something that might have been sorrow. "Vance was right about one thing. I'm in too deep to get out, but you're not. You still have a chance to do this clean, to walk away and be the good cop I know you are. So go. Before I change my mind about letting you." I realized I was shaking, adrenaline crash hitting me like a truck. My head throbbed where Vance had headbutted me. My hands were wet with something I didn't want to identify. "There are more," Reed said. "Vance has partners, drivers who transport the organs, buyers in half a dozen cities. If you arrest me tonight, they'll know something went wrong. They'll disappear, you'll never find them. But if you leave now, if you let me clean this up, you can spend the next few days gathering evidence. Do it right, build a real case." It was tempting. God help me, it was tempting to just walk away from this nightmare. But I thought about Jackson Merritt's body, wrapped in plastic like garbage. I thought about the hand in the main room still wearing its police radio. I thought about 11 victims, no, 12 now, counting Jackson, and the families who deserve to know what had happened to their loved ones. "No," I said. "You're both under arrest. Drop your weapon, Reed." He studied me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "You always were stubborn, Tommy. That's what I liked about you." He raised his weapon. I fired first. The shot took him in the right shoulder, spinning him around. His weapon clattered to the floor. He went down hard, clutching the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. "You son of a bitch," he gasped. "You actually shot me. You were going to shoot me," I pointed out. My voice sounded strange, too calm, too detached, as if I were narrating someone else's life. "Fair point." He laughed. actually laughed, a pained wheezing sound. God, that hurts. Did you have to aim for the shoulder? That's going to be hell to rehab. I kicked his weapon away and kept my Glock trained on him while I pulled out my radio, still dead. Cell phone, no signal. I was going to have to physically walk out of here to get help, which meant leaving Reed alone. Wounded, but still mobile. Still dangerous. There's a first aid kit in my cruiser, Reed said, reading my thoughts. You could stop the bleeding, make sure I don't die before you get back with backup. That's what a good cop would do. He was right. It was also exactly what he wanted. Me to get close enough that he could grab my weapon or overpower me. I'd seen him take down suspects twice my size. A shoulder wound wouldn't stop him if he got desperate enough. Or, he continued when I didn't move, you could leave me here. Let me bleed out while you run for help. Cleaner that way. Easier to explain. You wouldn't even be lying, you'd just be leaving out the part where you chose not to render aid. I'm not going to let you bleed to death. Why not? I helped kill 11 people, Tommy. 12. I'm a monster. You should put another bullet in me right now and save the state the cost of a trial. I stared at him, this man I'd thought I knew. I'm not you, I said finally. I'm not going to execute a wounded prisoner, Noble. There was something in his voice. Mockery, admiration, pain making him delirious. You're a better man than me, Tommy Brennan. That's a pretty low bar. He laughed again, then groaned as the movement aggravated his wound. Fair. Listen, you need to know something before you leave. The cooling unit, behind the locked door. There's 3 more bodies in there, already prepped for harvest. Names and dates are in the logbook in Vance's truck. White panel van, parked behind the eastern building. Keys are in his front left pocket. I felt sick. 3 more? We had a good month. Vance wanted to stockpile, said he had buyers lined up for major organs. Heart, lungs, the whole works. Top dollar stuff. Reed's voice was getting weaker. You'll want to call the state police, not just county sheriff. This is going to be huge, Tommy. You're going to be a hero. I don't want to be a hero. I want to arrest the people responsible and make sure this never happens again. Then you better move fast. Reed's eyes were starting to glaze. Shock, probably. Because I told you, Vance has partners, and they're not going to be happy when they realize their supply chain just got disrupted. I took a step backward, keeping my weapon trained on him. I'm going for help. Don't move. Not going anywhere, he mumbled. Might just rest here a minute. I turned and ran. The corridor seemed twice as long running back as it had been walking in. My flashlight, the one that had fallen during the fight with Vance, was still rolling somewhere in the darkness, and I didn't have time to search for it. The moonlight through the broken windows provided just enough illumination to keep me from running into walls, but shadows seemed to reach for me, and every sound made me flinch. I burst back into the main processing room and nearly tripped over the severed hand again. The radio attached to it was silent now, no more mysterious calls asking for my location. I should have grabbed it as evidence, but touching that piece of Bradley Garrison, made my stomach turn. There would be time for proper evidence collection once backup arrived. If backup arrived, I was halfway to the loading dock exit when I heard the sound, a low rumble, mechanical and growing louder. An engine. Someone else was here. I dropped to a crouch behind a rusted piece of machinery, weapon ready. The sound grew closer, and headlights swept through the open bay doors, painting the interior in harsh white light. A vehicle was approaching. No, 2 vehicles. One was clearly the white panel van Reed had mentioned, Vance's organ transport. But the other was a sedan, something dark and expensive looking, definitely not local. The vehicle stopped in the loading bay. Doors opened. Voices speaking quietly, professionally. I risked a glance around the machinery. 2 people had exited the sedan, a man and a woman, both wearing business attire that looked absurdly out of place in the abandoned dairy. The man was in his 50s, gray-haired, carrying a leather doctor's bag. The woman was younger, maybe 30, with her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was consulting a tablet computer, the screen's glow casting blue light on her face. We're early, the man said. His voice carried the careful enunciation of someone who'd grown up speaking a different language. Vance said midnight. Better early than late, the woman replied. The recipients are already in surgery prep. We need those organs within the next 3 hours or the viability window closes. Where's Dennis? He's usually here to help load. I'll text him. The woman pulled out a phone, then frowned. No signal out here. Typical. Vance really needs to invest in a cell booster for this location. They weren't worried. They weren't suspicious. They thought this was just another routine pickup in their organ harvesting operation. I had 2 options. stay hidden, and wait for them to discover Vance's body and Reed's condition, which would likely result in them fleeing before I could get back up, or announce myself now and hope I could arrest both of them before they realized the situation. Neither option was good. I was one cop with a handgun facing two unknown individuals who might be armed, plus whoever might still be driving the panel van. The smart move was to wait, get their license plate, and call for backup once I reached my cruiser. Then the woman said something that made my blood freeze. "Did you bring the next list?" Vance said he wanted to start scouting new candidates for next month's harvest. The man patted his jacket pocket. 6 names. Young, healthy, unlikely to be missed. Vance does excellent preliminary screening. They weren't just buyers. They were active participants in the selection process. They were helping Vance and Reed choose victims. I stood up, weapon raised. "Police, don't move!" The reaction was immediate and not what I expected. The woman didn't freeze. She ran, dropping her tablet and sprinting for the sedan with surprising speed. The man did freeze, but only for a second before reaching into his doctor's bag. "Gun!" I shouted. "Drop it!" He pulled out what I thought was a weapon but turned out to be a phone, a satellite phone, the kind that didn't need cell towers. He was calling for help. I lunged forward, trying to close the distance before he could complete the call. The woman had already reached the sedan and was fumbling with the door. In the loading bay, I heard the panel van's engine roar to life. The van came at me, not trying to flee but trying to run me down. I dived aside, my shoulder slamming into concrete. The van missed me by inches, its side mirror clipping the machinery I'd been hiding behind with a shriek of metal on metal. The van skidded to a stop. The driver's door opened and a teenager jumped out. Couldn't have been more than 17 or 18, wearing medical scrubs and a terrified expression. He took one look at me, gun in hand, and bolted into the darkness of the building. Too many targets, too many directions. I was losing control of the situation. The man with the doctor's bag was speaking rapidly into the satellite phone, words I didn't understand. Romanian, Russian, some Eastern European language. The woman had gotten the sedan door open and was climbing in. I fired a shot into the sedan's engine block. The bullet punched through the hood with a solid thunk, and a moment later steam began hissing from the radiator. The woman scrambled back out, hands up, finally realizing I was serious. "On the ground. Both of you, on the ground now." The man ended his call and carefully set down the phone. "Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. We're doctors, here to collect donated organs for transplant. This is all legal. Shut up and get on the ground." They complied, moving slowly. I approached, trying to keep both of them in my sightline while also watching the shadows where the teenage van driver had disappeared. This was wrong. All wrong. I needed backup, needed containment, needed about 6 more officers to properly secure this scene. My radio crackled to life. "Tommy." It was Reed's voice, weak but clear. "You need to listen to me. The people you just encountered, they're not going to stop. They have resources, money, connections. If you try to arrest them, if you try to expose this operation, they'll make you disappear, make your whole family disappear. These aren't street criminals, Tommy. These are people who buy and sell human organs for hundreds of thousands of dollars. They have the power to erase you. Then I guess I'll have to make sure the evidence is solid enough that they can't erase it," I replied into my radio. The woman on the ground laughed, a bitter, cold sound. "Evidence? You think evidence matters? We have lawyers in 3 states. We have politicians on payroll. We have judges who owe us favors. You're a small-town cop who's going to accuse respected medical professionals of murder. How do you think that's going to play out?" "Better than you think," I said, though I was far from confident. She was right. I was one cop in a small town with no resources, facing what sounded like an organized criminal enterprise with serious money and connections. But I had something they didn't. I was right. What they were doing was evil, and I had to believe that truth would matter. From deeper in the building, I heard a crash, then a shout. The teenage van driver must have run into something in the darkness, or run into Reed and Vance's bodies. Then, from the same direction, I saw an orange glow beginning to build. Fire. "Oh, hell," I breathed. The woman on the ground saw it too. "You fool. There's diesel fuel in those storage tanks. If the fire reaches them..." I didn't need her to finish the sentence. The dairy complex had several fuel tanks that had been abandoned when the facility closed. If they still had any diesel or propane in them, an explosion was imminent. "Move." I grabbed the woman by the arm, hauling her to her feet. "Both of you, move now." The man scrambled up, and I shoved them both toward the loading bay exit. Behind us, the orange glow was spreading rapidly. Someone, the teenage driver, must have started the fire deliberately, trying to destroy evidence, or trying to destroy me. We stumbled out into the October night. The woman and the man ran for their disabled sedan, apparently thinking they could somehow drive away in a vehicle I'd just shot. I ran for my cruiser, still parked beyond the main gate. I'd made it maybe 50 yards when the first explosion hit. The shockwave picked me up and threw me forward like a giant hand had swatted me. I hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Debris rained down, chunks of concrete, twisted metal, something hot that burned my neck before I could brush it away. My ears were ringing, high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. I rolled onto my back, dazed, and watched as the Miller Dairy transformed into an inferno. The main building was engulfed, flames shooting from every window. As I watched, the old silo, already leaning dangerously, began to collapse, falling with terrible slow-motion grace into the eastern building. Reed was still in there. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The world tilted crazily. Concussion, probably. The explosion had scrambled my brain. The woman and the man were also down, thrown by the blast. The woman was crawling toward the tree line, leaving a trail of blood behind her. She'd caught shrapnel from something. The man wasn't moving, sprawled face down with a piece of rebar protruding from his back. I finally managed to get to my feet, swaying. The dairy was completely gone, consumed by fire that reached 100 feet into the night sky. The heat was intense even from this distance, making the air shimmer and distort. Reed was dead. Had to be. Nobody could survive that inferno. Unless he'd gotten out. Unless he'd found the strength to crawl to safety while I'd been dealing with the organ buyers. I staggered toward the fire, knowing it was futile. Knowing I couldn't get close enough to search for him. The heat drove me back after a dozen steps. I could feel my exposed skin starting to burn, could smell my hair singeing. "Reed!" I screamed into the roar of the flames. "Dennis!" Nothing. Only fire. The woman had reached the tree line and disappeared into the shadows. The man with the rebar in his back was definitely dead. I could tell from the unnatural angle of his body, the spreading pool of darkness beneath him. My cruiser. I needed to reach my cruiser. Call this in. Get fire department, ambulances, state police. Needed to secure the scene before more evidence was destroyed. I turned and ran, or tried to. It was more of a shambling jog, my balance still compromised from the blast. The gate seemed miles away. The cruiser, when I finally reached it, looked untouched, sitting peacefully in the darkness as if the world hadn't just ended 50 yards away. I grabbed the radio handset. "Dispatch, this is Unit 2. I need fire department, ambulances, and every available unit at Miller Dairy immediately. We have an explosion, multiple casualties, officer down. Reed is..." My voice broke. "Reed is in the fire. I don't think he made it out." Marge's voice came back, professional despite the shock I could hear underneath. "Copy Unit 2. Fire department is rolling, ETA 6 minutes. Sheriff's department is en route. Tommy, are you injured?" Was I injured? I did a quick mental inventory. Concussion, definitely. Burns on my neck and possibly my back. Bruises from being thrown by the explosion, but nothing immediately life-threatening. "I'm ambulatory," I said, using the professional terminology to keep myself focused. "But I need you to call state police. Contact the nearest field office and tell them we have an officer-involved shooting, multiple homicides, and evidence of an organized crime operation. They're going to want to send investigators immediately." State police copy. "Tommy, what the hell happened out there?" "I'll explain when backup arrives. I paused, watching the dairy burn. "Just get everyone here as fast as possible." "This is bad, Marge. This is really bad." I spent the next 6 minutes doing what I could. I put out a bolo for the white panel van and the woman who'd fled into the woods. I checked on the dead man near the loading bay, confirming he was beyond help. I documented what I could see of the scene with my phone's camera, knowing that evidence was being destroyed by fire with every passing second. The fire trucks arrived first, 2 pumpers from the volunteer department, followed quickly by the county's rescue unit. The fire chief, a 50-year-old named Carl Morrison who ran a hardware store during the day, took one look at the inferno and shook his head. "That's a loss," he said flatly. "We'll keep it from spreading to the surrounding fields, but the buildings are gone. If someone's in there..." He looked at me and I saw the answer in his eyes. "My partner," I said. "Dennis Reed. He was in the main building when it went up." Carl put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Tommy. We'll search once it's safe, but that fire's too hot to approach right now. Probably burn for hours." The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, followed by state police 40 minutes after that. By the time the sun came up, the scene was swarming with investigators, evidence techs, and officials from half a dozen agencies. I gave my statement 3 times, once to the sheriff, once to the state police detective who'd caught the case, and once to an FBI agent who showed up around dawn after someone connected the dots about organ trafficking across state lines. I told them everything. About finding the hand with the radio, about confronting Vance and Reed, about the organ buyers and their satellite phone and their list of future victims, about the teenage van driver who'd fled into the darkness, and the woman who'd escaped into the woods. They found Vance's body in the corridor where I'd left him, badly burned but still identifiable. Reed's body took longer. They didn't recover it until the fire was completely out and the structure had been declared safe. He'd been near the locked cold room, apparently trying to reach the exit when the explosion hit. The medical examiner told me later that he'd probably been dead before the fire reached him. The shoulder wound I'd given him had bled more than I thought, and he'd lost consciousness from blood loss. I'm not sure if that's supposed to make me feel better. The cold room itself survived largely intact. Concrete walls and a heavy insulated door had protected it from the worst of the fire. Inside, they found exactly what Reed had said: 3 bodies, already prepared for organ harvest. The logbook in Vance's van provided names, dates, details of the operation stretching back 4 years. 11 victims became 12, became 15, became 18 as investigators dug deeper. Not all the bodies were in the cold room. Vance had been using his funeral home as a storage and preparation facility, had been disposing of waste materials in remote locations around the county. It took months to excavate all the sites, to identify all the victims. The teenage van driver turned himself in 3 days later, terrified and overwhelmed. His name was Tyler Morrison, Carl the fire chief's nephew, which explained how he'd gotten involved. Vance had recruited him with promises of easy money, had convinced him he was just a driver, not an accomplice to murder. Tyler provided testimony that broke open the buyer's network. The woman who'd fled into the woods was never found. Neither was the satellite phone or the list of potential victims. But the sedan had a GPS that showed dozens of trips to the dairy over the previous 2 years, and forensics on the man's body, identified as Dr. Alexander Petrov, a transplant surgeon who'd lost his medical license in Ukraine for ethical violations, provided connections to organ trafficking networks in 3 states. 27 people were eventually arrested. The investigation revealed a sophisticated operation that had been running for more than a decade across multiple states, with Vance and Reed's Cedarville cell being just one small part of a much larger network. I was hailed as a hero, given commendations, offered a promotion to detective. The governor came to Cedarville for a press conference, shook my hand, talked about my bravery and dedication. I quit the force 2 weeks later. I left Cedarville on a Tuesday morning in December, less than 2 months after the fire at the Miller Dairy. The town had become impossible. Everywhere I went, I saw ghosts. Saw Reed coaching Little League. Saw him at the coffee shop where we'd spent 100 mornings before shift. Saw him bouncing Annie on his knee at her birthday party. Laughing, human, the last person you'd suspect of being a serial killer. I moved to Pennsylvania, to a small town in the Appalachian foothills where nobody knew me and nobody cared about my past. I learned carpentry from a retired contractor who was patient with my mistakes and didn't ask questions about why a former cop wanted to work with his hands. There's something therapeutic about building things, about taking raw wood and creating something solid and real. Clean work, honest work, nothing like police work had been. Annie adjusted better than I expected. She was only 6, young enough that Cedarville was already becoming a vague memory. She made new friends at her new school, developed an obsession with dinosaurs, started taking piano lessons. My wife Julie had been skeptical about the move at first. We'd both grown up in Cedarville, all our family was there, but she saw how the town was slowly destroying me and agreed we needed a fresh start. For the first 6 months, I almost believed we'd made it, that we'd escaped. Then the calls started. The first one came in March, on a Saturday afternoon while I was installing cabinets in a kitchen renovation. My phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I'd gotten good at ignoring unknown numbers, assumed it was another reporter or another investigator with follow-up questions about the organ trafficking case. But something made me pick up. Hello? Silence. Not dead air, but the silence of someone listening, breathing quietly on the other end of the line. Hello? I repeated. Who is this? Then a voice, calm and cultured, with a hint of an accent I couldn't place. Officer Brennan. You've been difficult to locate. My blood went cold. Who is this? A colleague of Dr. Petrov's. You remember him, I think. You left him with a piece of rebar through his spine at the Miller Dairy. I hung up immediately and blocked the number. Told myself it was a crank call, someone who'd read about the case in the papers and thought it would be funny to scare me. The second call came a week later. Different number, same voice. "You can't block all of us, Officer Brennan. We have resources, patience. We know where you live now. 447 Oak Ridge Road, apartment 2B. Charming little place. Very quiet. Your daughter walks to school, doesn't she? Past the park, then left on Maple Street. She likes to stop and feed the ducks in the pond." I reported it to the local police. They took it seriously. Threats against a law enforcement officer and his family, even a former officer, get attention. They traced the number to a burner phone purchased in Baltimore, used once, then destroyed. No leads, no way to track it. They offered to put a patrol car near our apartment, to have an officer watch Annie's school, but they couldn't provide that level of security indefinitely. And the caller had made it clear they knew our routines, our movements, our vulnerabilities. Julie wanted to move again. I did too, but I was starting to understand something. These people, whoever they were, whatever remained of the organ trafficking network, weren't going to stop. They had the money and resources to find us anywhere. Moving would just postpone the inevitable. The third call came in April. I'd started leaving my phone at home when I went to work, but they found Julie's number. "Mrs. Brennan. What a pleasure. I hope Tommy is well. We haven't spoken in a few weeks." Julie hung up immediately and called me, shaking. That night we sat down with Annie and explained, in age-appropriate terms, that some bad people might try to contact her, might try to get her to go with them. We practiced scenarios. Stranger danger, code words, who to trust, turning our 6-year-old into a paranoid kid because of my job, because I'd done the right thing. The fourth call came in May, to my mother back in Cedarville. "Mrs. Brennan, the senior Mrs. Brennan, your son made some powerful people very unhappy. Did you know there's a contract out on him? $50,000 for information leading to his location. $100,000 for proof of death. Quite reasonable, really, considering the damage he caused to our operations." My mother had a heart condition. The stress of the call put her in the hospital for 3 days. I flew back to Ohio, sat by her bedside, and listened to her tell me, begging me to fix this, to make it stop, to do whatever I needed to do to protect my family. But I couldn't fix it. The state police had a task force investigating what remained of the trafficking network, but arrests came slowly. The organization had layers of insulation, cutouts, plausible deniability. Every arrest led to a lawyer who made bail, and then the suspect would disappear before trial. Witness protection was offered to me and my family, but that meant giving up everything: our identities, our histories, our connection to everyone we'd ever known. The fifth call came in June. It was different from the others, not threatening, but matter of fact. "Officer Brennan, we've decided you're not worth the continued investment. The contract on you has been canceled. Consider this your one courtesy warning. Stop cooperating with investigators. Stop giving depositions. Stay in Pennsylvania and live your quiet carpenter's life, and we'll leave you alone. But if you continue to assist law enforcement in their persecution of our associates, the contract will be reinstated. Do we have an understanding?" I said nothing. After a long moment, the line went dead. I sat in my apartment for 3 hours, turning that conversation over in my mind. They were giving me an out, a chance to walk away from all of this, to protect my family, to move on with my life. All I had to do was abandon the pursuit of justice for 18 murder victims. I called the FBI agent handling the case, told him I wanted full immunity for any cooperation I provided, and I wanted witness protection for my family, not as fugitives but with enough resources and surveillance that the trafficking network would think twice about coming after us. The agent made it happen. By the end of June, Julie and Annie were living in a secure facility in Virginia with 24-hour protection while I continued to testify, to provide evidence, to help investigators dismantle what remained of the organ trafficking operation. It took 2 years. 2 years of living in safe houses, 2 years of depositions in grand juries and trials, 2 years of looking over my shoulder and teaching my daughter that the nice man who smiled at us in the grocery store might be someone who wanted to hurt us. But in the end, we won. Sort of. 37 people were convicted. The trafficking network was disrupted badly enough that the FBI considered the operation closed. The families of the 18 victims got answers, got closure, got to bury their loved ones properly, and I got my life back. Somewhat. We moved to Vermont this time, to a town so small it doesn't have a police department, just a part-time sheriff who handles noise complaints and helps with highway accidents. I opened my own carpentry business, building custom furniture and doing high-end renovations for wealthy retirees from Boston and New York. Annie is 12 now, well-adjusted despite everything, spending her free time training for cross-country and arguing with her mother about phone privileges like a normal kid. Julie and I are still married, though those 2 years strained us in ways I'm not sure we've fully recovered from. Some nights I catch her looking at me with an expression I can't quite read. Resentment? Fear? Grief for the normal life we lost? But we survived. We made it through. Except for the calls. They still come. Not often, maybe once every few months. Always from untraceable numbers. Always the same calm voice. Hello, Thomas. They use my first name now, a false intimacy that makes my skin crawl. I hope you're well. I hope your family is well. I hope you remember our arrangement. I never respond. Just listen until they hang up. Sometimes the caller shares information that clearly comes from surveillance. I noticed Annie made honor roll again. You must be very proud. Or Julie's mother is recovering nicely from her hip surgery, isn't she? Modern medicine is remarkable. Other times they're more direct. We lost 6 more associates to federal prosecution this month. The organization is very unhappy with your continued cooperation with law enforcement. If there were to be another trial, another deposition, your arrangement might need to be renegotiated. The FBI assures me these are empty threats. The trafficking network was broken, they say. What's left is too fragmented and disorganized to pose a real danger. The calls are psychological warfare, nothing more, an attempt to keep me frightened and compliant. Maybe they're right, but I still check the locks twice before bed. Still vary my route to work. Still taught Annie a code phrase that means run and don't stop until you reach the police station. Still keep a gun safe in my workshop with a loaded Glock that I've test-fired at the range every month for the past 5 years, just to make sure it's ready if I need it. Sometimes I dream about that night at the Miller Dairy. In the dreams, Reed doesn't hesitate when he draws his weapon. He shoots me, quick and clean, and Vance's boning knife finds my throat. In the dreams, I'm lying in that cold corridor, feeling my life drain away, while Reed stands over me and explains, patiently like he's teaching me something important, that I should have taken the deal, should have joined them, should have been smart. I wake from those dreams gasping, and Julie rolls over to hold me. And I lie there in the darkness listening to her breathe and wondering if I made the right choice. Because here's the thing they don't tell you about being a hero. It's expensive. It costs relationships and peace of mind and the ability to trust that the normal world is actually normal. It costs sleep and health and years of your life spent looking over your shoulder. It cost your daughter's innocence, teaching her at 6 years old that there are monsters in the world who would hurt her just to punish her father for doing his job. Was it worth it? The FBI would say yes. The families of the 18 victims would say yes. The 37 people convicted would probably say no, but nobody's asking them. I don't know what I'd say. Some days I think yes. We saved lives, stopped a terrible evil, brought justice to people who deserved it. Other days, I think about the cost, and I'm not so sure. This morning, I got another call. Same voice, same calm tone. Hello, Thomas. It's been a while. I hope you're well. I wanted you to know, we found Tyler Morrison, the young man who drove the van that night, the one who testified against us. We found him living in Seattle under a new identity, working at a coffee shop. Such a shame. He seemed to be doing so well. I hung up. Immediately called my FBI contact. They'll check on Tyler, make sure he's safe, probably move him to a new location with better security. Probably. But the call accomplished what it was meant to accomplish. It reminded me that the network still exists, still has reach, still has people willing to hurt former associates who testified against them. It reminded me that my cooperation, my testimony, my depositions, my willingness to help investigators, has consequences that extend beyond my family to everyone involved in bringing down the trafficking operation. It reminded me that being a hero means spending the rest of your life waiting for the other shoe to drop. Tonight I'll check the locks. Tomorrow I'll vary my route to work. This weekend, Annie and I will review our emergency procedures again, wrapped in the fiction that it's just a game, just practice, nothing to really worry about. And next month, or the month after, or the one after that, my phone will ring with an unknown number. And I'll answer it because not answering is somehow worse than knowing what they're going to say. And that calm voice will remind me that they're still out there, still watching, still waiting. And I'll wonder, for the 1000th time, if I made the right choice that October night in 2013 when I walked into the Miller Dairy and found a severed hand with a police radio attached to it calling my name in the darkness. I'll wonder if doing the right thing was worth the price I paid. I'll wonder if I'd make the same choice again knowing what I know now. And honestly, I still don't know the answer, but I wake up every morning, kiss my wife and daughter, and try to build something good and solid with my hands. I try to be present in this life I've chosen, this quiet Vermont existence, far from the nightmares of Cedarville. I try to believe that justice matters, that truth matters, that the cost was worth it. Most days, I almost succeed. Today is not one of those days. Today is one of the days when my phone rings with an unknown number, and I hear that calm voice saying my name, reminding me that I will never truly be free from the choices I made. But I answer the phone anyway, every single time, because the alternative, ignoring it, pretending they've gone away, is worse than knowing they're still out there. And maybe that's what heroism really is. Not the dramatic moment of confrontation, but the long, grinding aftermath. The decades of checking locks and varying routes and teaching your daughter that the world is more dangerous than it should be. The decades of answering the phone when it rings, even though you know exactly what voice you'll hear on the other end. The decades of living with the knowledge that you did the right thing, and the right thing cost you everything, and you'd probably do it again if you had to. Probably. God, I hope I would. My name is Graham Pierce, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me in September of 2017, deep in the Allegheny National Forest of Pennsylvania. I still have the scars, physical ones on my shoulder and forearm, psychological ones that surface every time I hear something moving through underbrush after dark. The official record states that my brother, my daughter, and I survived a black bear attack. That's a lie, and everyone who matters knows it. I pulled our rented Class C motorhome off Route 62 just after sunrise on a Saturday morning, the kind of crisp autumn day that makes you forget winter is coming. The rental smelled like industrial cleaner and someone else's vacation, but my daughter Lucy didn't care. At 8 years old, everything was still an adventure. She pressed her face against the window, counting deer, inventing stories about the farmhouses we passed. My brother Tyler rode shotgun, scrolling through fishing forums on his phone and making declarations about the trout he was going to catch. Tyler was 31, 3 years younger than me, and had never quite shaken the competitive streak that made him insufferable in high school. He'd planned this trip for months, researching trails that would be empty after Labor Day weekend, promising Lucy she could roast marshmallows every night and stay up past her bedtime. I'd checked my Marlin 336 lever-action rifle twice before locking it in the rear storage compartment, a habit from my 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 10th Mountain Division. The weapon was chambered in .30-30, reliable for medium-sized game within 100 yards. Black bears were my primary concern, not because they're typically aggressive, but because a startled bear with cubs will defend its young without hesitation. Pennsylvania has one of the largest black bear populations in the country, and the Allegheny National Forest hosts hundreds of them. The trailhead parking area consisted of gravel, weathered signs, and a rusted information kiosk whose map had faded to illegibility. The air smelled of wet leaves, decomposing wood, and something metallic I couldn't place, probably runoff from the abandoned oil pumps that dotted this part of the forest. The oil industry had carved up western Pennsylvania decades ago, leaving behind skeletal derricks and contaminated soil. Lucy jumped out wearing neon pink hiking boots, a birthday present she insisted on bringing despite Tyler's jokes about scaring away every animal within 5 miles. She splashed through puddles left by the previous night's rain while Tyler grabbed his fishing gear from the storage hatch. I shouldered my pack, which contained a first aid kit, water bottles, energy bars, a compass, and a tactical flashlight. Old habits. The trail began as a well-maintained path through mixed hardwood forest, oak, maple, birch, their leaves just beginning to turn orange and yellow. Squirrels chattered in the canopy. A woodpecker hammered somewhere to our left. Normal forest sounds. After 20 minutes of hiking, I'd counted exactly 247 steps, another habit from overseas. Counting creates order. Order pushes back chaos. Lucy walked ahead, swishing her boots through damp leaves and singing a song from a movie I'd never seen. Tyler whistled an off-key rendition of a Johnny Cash tune. I brought up the rear, scanning the tree line out of instinct, even though the most dangerous thing out here should have been a defensive mother bear or maybe a rabid raccoon. We reached the ranger shelter after 2 miles, a 3-sided log lean-to with a corrugated tin roof that rattled in the breeze. The structure was maintained by the Forest Service for emergency use, stocked with a few fire-starting supplies and a logbook where hikers could record their visits. I flipped through it while Tyler scouted the nearby stream bank for fishing spots. The last entry was dated 3 weeks prior. We were alone out here. I laid out lunch on one of the rough-hewn benches. Peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices, trail mix. Lucy ate quickly, already bored with sitting still. When Tyler returned announcing the stream was too muddy for decent fishing, Lucy immediately perked up. "Can we keep walking to that chimney?" she asked. Please, she'd found photographs online of an old stone chimney, all that remained of a homestead from the 1800s, abandoned when the family either died or moved west. The chimney stood about 3 miles from the shelter, accessible by an unmaintained trail that the National Forest Service no longer officially recognized. I checked my watch, 11:47 a.m. We could make it there and back with time to spare before sunset at 7:14 p.m. Tyler shrugged agreement. I told Lucy yes, and her face lit up in that way that reminds me why I do anything difficult in this world. The trail narrowed considerably after we left the shelter. Briars reached across the path, scratching our legs. Fallen trees blocked the way in places, forcing us to detour through thick underbrush. The GPS on my phone showed our position clearly enough, but the topographic map revealed why this trail wasn't maintained. It crossed several steep ravines, making it dangerous during wet weather. About 45 minutes into this second leg, roughly halfway to the chimney according to my GPS, the forest changed. I noticed it before I could articulate why. The change was subtle at first, a reduction in bird calls, the absence of squirrel movement. Then I realized, complete silence. No insects, no wind, no rustling leaves, just our footsteps and breathing. Lucy stopped abruptly, camera half raised toward something that had caught her attention. Tyler bumped into her, opened his mouth to make a joke, then closed it. He'd felt it too. "Deer," Lucy whispered. I listened, straining to hear hoofbeats or the distinctive snort of a whitetail. Nothing. Then, a rhythmic thudding, heavy and regular. Something large moving through the forest downslope from our position, parallel to our path. Branches parted about 30 yards downhill. Through the gap between hemlocks I saw it. The figure moved upright like a human but was too tall. I estimated 7 feet, with proportions that violated human anatomy. Its shoulders were massively broad, built like a powerlifter who'd added another 100 pounds of muscle beyond what should be possible. The torso tapered to a narrow waist, then flared again at powerful haunches and thighs. But it was covered in fur, dense and dark brown, the color of walnut stain on old wood. The head was the worst part, wolf-like, but the skull was too large, too squared off. The muzzle was blunt and wide, the ears were swept back and pointed, but they moved independently like a dog's, swiveling to catch sounds. One eye was bright amber, almost golden. The other was clouded white with scar tissue that ran from brow to jaw. Its arms, I couldn't call them forelegs, were longer than human proportions would allow, ending in hands that were both familiar and wrong. The palms were elongated, fingers too long, each one tipped with a curved black claw at least 3 inches long. The claws looked surgical sharp. A smell hit me a moment later. Wet dog, rotting cedar, and underneath it something chemical and wrong, like formaldehyde or industrial solvent. Lucy gasped, a tiny intake of breath. The thing's head snapped toward us with mechanical precision. Its nostrils, black and leathery, flared as it tested the air. The good eye fixed on us with an intelligence I recognized from Afghanistan, from watching enemy combatants calculate angles of fire and estimate distances. This was not an animal operating on instinct. This was something thinking, planning, assessing threat levels. My hand moved toward the rifle in my pack, then stopped. The weapon was broken down for transport, unloaded. I'd need at least 45 seconds to assemble and chamber a round. The thing was 30 yards away and looked like it could cover that distance in under 3 seconds. I stepped forward slowly, positioning myself between the creature and Lucy. Tyler moved beside me without a word, his fishing knife open in his hand. The blade was 4 inches long, absurdly inadequate, but I was grateful for his presence anyway. "Back up slowly," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Don't run, don't make sudden movements." We retreated 10 paces. The creature mirrored our movement, pacing us step for step. Its weight shifted forward onto the balls of its feet, if you could call them feet, in a way that reminded me of a sprinter in the blocks, coiled and ready to explode forward. Then it turned and moved down the slope, disappearing behind a cluster of spruce trees. The movement was silent despite its size. No crashing through undergrowth, no snapping branches. It simply vanished. Tyler exhaled hard enough that I felt his breath on my neck. What the hell was that? Biggest bear I've ever... That wasn't a bear. I cut him off. My voice came out louder than I intended, too harsh in the renewed silence. The forest sound slowly returned. A blue jay screamed somewhere above us. Cicadas resumed their electric buzzing, but every snapped twig, Every rustle of leaves now sounded like the thing coming back. We moved quickly back toward the shelter, Lucy pressed between us. I kept turning around, scanning our back trail, hand hovering near my pack. My heart hammered against my ribs. My mouth had gone completely dry. When we reached the shelter, I immediately went to the motorhome and retrieved the rifle. My hands shook as I assembled it. Muscle memory from weapons training taking over while my conscious mind tried to process what I'd seen. I loaded 7 rounds into the tube magazine, chambered one, and engaged the safety. Lucy watched me with wide eyes. She was smart enough to know that whatever we'd seen wasn't normal, wasn't safe. Something big is out here, I told her, keeping my voice level. Something I don't understand. We're leaving now. We're going to walk back to the parking area quickly, and then we're driving away. Tyler nodded, his jaw working side to side, grinding molars. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his fishing rod like a club. We started down the main trail at a fast walk, Lucy between us, my rifle held at low ready. The weight of it in my hands was comforting. 10 pounds of wood and steel that had killed deer cleanly at 100 yards. Would it stop that thing? I didn't know. The creature's muscle mass suggested it could absorb significant trauma. 10 minutes into our retreat, Lucy started limping. Her bootlace had come untied and wrapped around her ankle. I knelt to fix it, fingers fumbling with the wet lace, aware of how vulnerable we were in this position. Pine needles rustled behind us. The thing stood 30 feet back, partially obscured by a hemlock trunk. It had closed the distance without making a sound, stalking us like a cat stalks a mouse. The good amber eye fixed on Lucy's pink backpack. The creature's mouth hung slightly open, and I watched saliva drip from one corner, hitting a leaf with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet. I stood and raised the rifle, settling the front sight on the creature's center mass. My training kicked in. Breathe, squeeze, don't jerk the trigger. The thing's head tilted, gaze shifting from Lucy to the rifle muzzle. It paused, and I swear I saw calculation in that amber eye, some kind of assessment happening behind it. A wet popping sound cracked through the air, joints dislocating or realigning, I couldn't tell. The creature dropped to all fours and sprang sideways in one fluid motion. I fired. The gunshot was deafening. Bark exploded from a tree trunk, but the thing was already gone, moving through the forest like a ghost. Lucy screamed and ran. I grabbed her arm and ran with her, Tyler covering our backs with his knife held in a reverse grip, cursing steadily under his breath. We broke from the tree line onto asphalt, the ranger access road that connected the trailhead parking area to the main route. An F-150 rounded the bend at that exact moment, red and blue lights flashing from a portable unit on the dashboard. 2 deputies climbed out, hands moving toward their service weapons when they saw me waving a rifle over my head. "Weapon down! Down!" the first deputy shouted. He was young, maybe 25, with a name tag that read Miller. I dropped to one knee, laying the rifle on the pavement. "There's something in the forest," I shouted. "Something big, aggressive. It chased us. It's not a bear." The deputies exchanged a look I couldn't read. Not surprise, not disbelief. Something closer to resignation, maybe exhaustion. The second deputy, Hayes according to his nameplate, spoke into his radio. "This is Unit 12 reporting civilians on Ranger access, mile marker 9, requesting transport to station. Possible wildlife encounter." Miller gestured for us to approach. "Get in the truck. Station's safer." We climbed into the bed while the deputies returned to the cab. Tyler pulled Lucy against him, shielding her from the wind as the truck accelerated. I held my rifle, even though Miller had given me a hard look about it. Nobody tried to take it from me. We never made it to the station. At mile marker 12, approximately 3 miles from where the deputies picked us up, the rear window of the truck cab imploded. I saw the claws first, black, curved, each one as long as my index finger. They hooked over the window frame and pulled. Metal shrieked. The entire frame bent inward like aluminum foil. Glass fragments scattered across the truck bed, glittering in the afternoon sun. The thing hauled itself onto the roof. The truck's suspension groaned. The entire vehicle settled on its shocks as at least 400 pounds of muscle and fury positioned itself above us. I heard claws scrabbling on metal, finding purchase. Deputy Miller slammed the brakes. Lucy and I pitched forward into the toolbox. Tyler's shoulder hit the cab wall hard enough that I heard the impact over the engine noise. He twisted, taking most of the blow, keeping Lucy's skull from cracking against the metal. Shotgun blasts erupted from inside the cab. Boom, boom, boom. 3 rapid shots that punched holes through the roof above our heads. Daylight streamed through the perforations. Something heavy hit the truck bed with enough force to crack the plastic liner. I looked up and saw the creature clearly for the first time in direct sunlight. 7 feet tall, perhaps taller. The torso was thick as an oak tree, individual muscles visible beneath the fur, each one defined and huge. The arms, bubble legs, whatever they were, showed similar hypertrophy, development beyond what seemed physically possible. The thighs were massive, built for explosive power. But it was the patches of missing fur that made my stomach drop. Sections of the creature's hide had been shaved down to skin, and on that exposed flesh I could see tattoos. Not decorative art, industrial markings. Stenciled numbers in black ink, B74402. Next to the numbers a barcode, the kind you'd scan at a grocery store. And clipped to what might have been an ear, if ears could be triangular and mobile, was a bright orange electronic tag, the kind used for livestock tracking. My mind supplied the only possible explanation. Government property. The truck fishtailed hard to the left. Miller had overcorrected, and now we were sliding on wet asphalt. The vehicle left the road, went airborne for a fraction of a second, and slammed into the drainage ditch. The impact threw me against the side wall. My rifle clattered away. Lucy's scream was cut off by Tyler's hand covering her mouth, protecting her from biting her tongue, I realized later. The truck came to rest at a 45-degree angle, nose down in the ditch. I tasted blood from where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. My shoulder throbbed where it had hit the wheel well. Out! I shouted, already moving. I kicked the tailgate. The latch had jammed. I kicked again and it flew open. I grabbed Lucy and half-dragged, half-carried her out of the truck bed. Tyler crawled after us, his face pale, a cut bleeding above his right eye. The deputies scrambled from the cab, Miller pumping fresh shells into his Remington 870, Hayes drawing his sidearm. A Glock 19, I noted automatically. The creature stood on the asphalt 20 feet away, in full daylight, without trees obscuring it. The thing was simultaneously more and less believable. More because I could see every detail with horrible clarity. The way its chest expanded with each breath. The intelligence in that good amber eye, the slightly asymmetrical build that suggested right-handedness or at least a dominant side, less because my brain kept insisting that what I was seeing violated fundamental rules about what animals could look like, how they could move. It dropped to all fours, and somehow that was worse than when it stood upright. On all fours, it moved like a predator, weight shifting forward onto those elongated hands, wrists bent at broken angles that should have been impossible, claws clicking on the gravel shoulder. Hayes fired. 3 shots center mass. I watched the bullets hit, saw fur and tissue erupt in small red blooms. The creature flinched but didn't slow down. "Run!" Miller shouted. "Rest stop. Quarter-mile up the road." We ran. Lucy's hand was in mine, her palm slippery with sweat or maybe blood. I couldn't tell and didn't have time to check. Tyler ran beside us, his fishing knife still clutched in his right hand. Behind us, I heard Miller shouting coordinates into his radio, then his shotgun booming again and again. A scream echoed across the forest. "Hayes." His voice cut off midway through the sound, ending in a wet gurgle that made the hair on my neck stand up. Miller's radio crackled. "Multiple officers down. Need immediate backup. Mile marker 12, Ranger Access Road. Shots fired. Officer down." Then silence. No more shotgun blasts. No more radio chatter. The rest stop appeared ahead. A small brick building with bathrooms, vending machines, and a covered picnic area. Old construction, probably built in the 1970s, solid masonry walls and a flat tar roof. One functioning exterior light flickered on automatically as dusk deepened, casting weak yellow illumination across the parking area. We burst through the bathroom door, women's side, closest entrance. I slammed it behind us and immediately started looking for ways to secure it. The door was steel, commercial grade, with a standard handle and a slide bolt lock at the top. I engaged the bolt, then grabbed a push broom from a corner and wedged the handle through the door pull and against the opposing wall. Tyler grabbed one of the vending machines, a Pepsi unit, probably 300 pounds, and dragged it across the floor with a strength I'd never seen from him before. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. We positioned it against the door, creating a barricade that might buy us a few seconds if the thing tried to break through. Lucy collapsed against the far wall, sobbing. I went to her, checked her for injuries. No blood, no obvious trauma, just terror, which was bad enough. I pulled out my phone. No signal. These concrete bathrooms were notorious dead zones, and we were too far from any cell tower for reliable service anyway. The deputy's radio was back in their truck, useless. Deputy Miller's shotgun rested on the sink counter where he'd set it down while securing his gear belt. I grabbed it, checked the magazine tube. 2 shells left. I pumped one into the chamber, set the safety. Tyler examined the small window above the toilet stall, one of those narrow ventilation windows with frosted glass and a metal grate. He climbed onto the toilet, looked out. "I can see the parking area," he said quietly. "Nothing moving, no sign of—" He trailed off. I knew why. Neither of us wanted to talk about what we'd heard happen to Hayes. What might have happened to Miller. "We wait for dark, then we move," I said, trying to sound confident. "We go to the highway on foot. Flag down a car. There are houses about 2 miles south according to the signs we passed." Tyler nodded but didn't look convinced. Lucy had stopped crying, but her eyes were glazed, shock setting in. I knew that look. I'd seen it on soldiers after their first firefight, that 1,000-yard stare where the brain temporarily checks out because reality has become too much to process. I sat down against the wall, shotgun across my lap, and tried to think tactically. The creature was fast, strong, and apparently bulletproof, or at least bullet-resistant. Small arms fire didn't stop it, but it had those tattoos, those numbers, that tracking tag. Someone made this thing. Someone had tested it, measured it, decided it was ready for what? Field trials? Disposal? A new sound interrupted my thoughts. Sirens, the wail of emergency vehicles approaching fast, growing louder. I stood, moved to the window. Tyler shifted to give me room. I looked out through the grate. Blue and red strobes bounced off the trees bordering the parking area. A vehicle was approaching. No, not approaching. Already here. Pulling into the rest stop lot at speed, engine whining. It was our motorhome, the rental Class C that I'd left parked at the trailhead 3 miles away. Someone was driving it, and they'd managed to wire the emergency lights to create that siren effect. But the silhouette behind the windshield was wrong. Too tall, shoulders too wide, head pressed against the ceiling. The motorhome stopped in the middle of the lot. The engine died. The driver's door opened and the thing climbed out. Under the flashing red and blue lights, its fur seemed to change color with each strobe, dark brown to crimson to electric blue. It moved with disturbing fluidity toward the passenger side, opened that door, and reached inside. When it straightened, it was holding Tyler's backpack, the one we'd left in the motorhome. The one stuffed with beef jerky and summer sausage and protein bars, all the strongly scented food that outdoors experts tell you never to bring on a hike because it attracts predators. The creature strode directly toward the bathroom building. It moved on 2 legs now, upright, with a gait that reminded me of videos I'd seen of chimpanzees walking bipedally, not quite human. Weight distribution slightly forward, but functional. It stopped 10 feet from the door. The good amber eye reflected the emergency lights, twin points of gold in the gathering darkness. It sniffed along the door seam, nostrils working. Then it reared back and swung. One clawed hand struck the door handle with incredible force. Metal screamed. The handle bent, twisted, nearly tore free from its mounting. The vending machine scraped forward several inches. Into the closet, I hissed at Tyler. "Take Lucy, now." There was a janitor's closet at the back of the bathroom. A tiny space with a mop sink and cleaning supplies. Tyler half-carried Lucy toward it while I took up position beside the doorframe, shotgun raised. The thing hit the door again. The upper hinge popped free, screws ripping out of the concrete frame. Dust rained from the ceiling. The vending machine tilted, cans inside rattling like ammunition. I aimed for the bright orange tag clipped to its ear. A clear target, small enough that destroying it might actually hurt the thing, or at least disorient it. I fired. The tag exploded in a spray of plastic fragments and sparks. The electronic components must have had a battery or capacitor because the flash was bright enough to leave after images. The creature howled, an ascending multitonal sound like feedback from speakers mixed with a wolf's cry. Its hands flew to its head, claws raking across its own skull, gouging furrows in the flesh. Lucy screamed from the closet. The sound of her terror snapped me into a cold clarity I hadn't felt since combat. I tried to chamber another round, but the action stuck. Pump-action shotguns can jam if you don't work the slide smoothly, and I'd short-stroked it in my hurry. The spent shell was caught halfway out of the ejection port. Tyler burst from the closet, the Marlin rifle in his hands. He must have grabbed it from where it had fallen in the truck bed, though I didn't remember seeing him do it. He worked the lever action, chambering around, and fired both barrels into the creature's abdomen at point-blank range. Buckshot tore through fur, skin, muscle, blood, dark, almost black, with a consistency closer to tar than normal blood, sprayed across the white tiles. The creature staggered backward, one hand clutching the wound, but it didn't fall, didn't collapse. It just stood there, bleeding, staring at us with that calculating amber eye. I threw the jammed shotgun aside, drew the .45 pistol from the holster on my belt, a Springfield 1911 I'd carried since my military days and now kept for home defense. I thumbed off the safety and fired twice into the creature's throat, aiming for the vulnerable area below the jaw where major arteries should be. The bullets hit home. More of that dark blood erupted from the wound. The thing's breathing changed, becoming a wet hiss as air escaped through torn tissue. I kept firing. 3 more shots, emptying the magazine. Center mass, throat, head. Each impact rocked the creature backward, but it stayed on its feet with impossible resilience. Finally, it dropped to one knee, then both knees. That wet hissing continued, blood flowing freely now, pooling on the concrete. Tyler grabbed Lucy from the closet and pulled her past the dying creature, toward the shattered doorway. I started to follow, then stopped. The thing's good eye was still focused on me, not with aggression anymore. The expression, if you could call it that, had changed. It reminded me of a dog that's been beaten by its owner, confused by the betrayal, unable to understand why the thing it trusted had turned on it. Whoever made this creature, whatever laboratory or black site program had bred or engineered or mutated it into existence, had done this to it. The tattoos, the barcode, the tracking tag. This thing was property, livestock, an experiment, and now it was dying on a bathroom floor, killed by the people it had hunted, breathing its last through a throat I'd destroyed with bullets. The creature's chest rose once, twice, then stopped. The amber eye went flat and lifeless, the light behind it extinguishing like a switched-off lamp. Sirens approached again, real ones this time. Multiple vehicles, coming fast. Red and blue lights splashed through the broken doorway, illuminating the scene. A dead creature that shouldn't exist. A bathroom painted with its blood. 3 survivors who'd just killed something they couldn't explain. Deputies poured through the entrance, at least 6 of them, weapons drawn. Behind them came men in plain black jackets with yellow patches reading USDA Wildlife Services, except the patches looked too crisp, too new, like costumes in a play. "Weapons down," someone shouted. "Hands where we can see them." I carefully placed my pistol on the ground and raised my hands. Tyler did the same with the rifle. Lucy clung to his leg, face buried against his jeans. The men in black jackets formed a cordon around the creature's corpse. One of them produced an aerosol canister and began spraying the wounds with some kind of foam that hissed and bubbled and somehow sealed the flesh like melted plastic. Another photographed the tattoos and barcode with a professional camera, methodically documenting every marking. A captain, an actual sheriff's captain with the right insignia though his name tag had been removed, led us outside to an ambulance. He was maybe 50, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Official report says black bear attack," he told us quietly. "You'll sign it." Confused by the emergency lights, became aggressive. Deputies Miller and Hayes died defending civilians. "You defended yourselves. Black bear was put down. That's the story." Tyler spat on the man's boots. The captain didn't even flinch. "I'm not signing anything," I said. My voice came out flat, emotionless. Shock was setting in for me too now, delayed but inevitable. The captain stared at me for a long moment. "Then you didn't see anything at all, just a black bear. Understood?" I didn't answer. He took that as agreement. They let us leave after an EMT checked us for injuries. Lucy had bruises. Tyler had a mild concussion from hitting his head. I had a separated shoulder from the truck crash. None of it mattered. We were alive. I drove us straight to Pittsburgh that night, 3 hours of dark highway with the lights off, more than necessary because I kept imagining things moving in the tree line. Lucy slept in Tyler's lap, exhausted by terror. Tyler stared out the passenger window, the rifle across his knees despite my telling him to put it away. "Next time we go fishing, it's going to be at the coast," he muttered. "Somewhere flat, somewhere without trees." I didn't respond. I was too busy watching the rearview mirror, half expecting to see amber eyes reflecting in the darkness behind us. We reached my apartment in the city just before midnight. I carried Lucy upstairs while Tyler brought in what little gear we'd salvaged. Lucy woke up briefly while I was putting her to bed, looked at me with those wide 8-year-old eyes, and asked, "Daddy, what was that thing?" I had no answer that wouldn't give her nightmares for years. So I told her what the captain had said. "Just a confused bear, honey. Just a bear." She didn't believe me. I could see it in her face. But she was too tired to argue, and sleep claimed her within minutes. Tyler and I sat in the living room, drinking beer we'd found in my refrigerator, not talking. What was there to say? We'd killed something that shouldn't exist, watched two men die, and been told to pretend none of it happened. Around 3 a.m., Tyler finally spoke. Who makes something like that? I'd been thinking about the same question for hours. Someone with resources. Government lab, maybe? Defense contractor. DARPA does biological weapons research. So does the CDC. Could be military, could be civilian oversight. And they just let it loose in a national forest? Maybe it escaped. Maybe they were field testing it. Maybe I trailed off because every explanation I could imagine was worse than the last. Maybe they're making more of them. Tyler finished his beer and crushed the can. I'm going to report it. Call the news, call Congress, call someone. And tell them what? That you saw a werewolf with a barcode. They'll put you in a psychiatric ward. I have proof. My phone? I took pictures before we ran, but when he checked his phone, the photos were gone. All of them. The gallery showed empty spaces where the images should have been. Metadata intact, but the actual files corrupted or deleted. My phone was the same. Lucy's camera, which we'd retrieved from Tyler's pack, had a wiped SD card. Someone had scrubbed our devices remotely. Someone with access to cell networks and wireless capabilities we didn't want to think about. Tyler left the next morning without saying much. He lived in Ohio, worked construction, had a life to get back to. Before he walked out the door, he turned and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Pure, undiluted fear. If they made one, he said, they made more. And if one got loose, others will too. Then he was gone, and I was alone with Lucy and the memory of amber eyes calculating my death. The next few weeks blurred together. I took Lucy to a child psychologist, told her Lucy had witnessed a traumatic wildlife attack. The psychologist asked if I'd considered getting therapy myself. I told her no. That was a lie, but I couldn't imagine explaining the truth to a mental health professional without getting committed. The rental company called about the motorhome. It had been found abandoned on a Forest Service road, interior destroyed, seats torn apart, dashboard ripped out, windows smashed. They accused me of joyriding or vandalism. I paid the damage fee, over $17,000, and didn't contest their story. What could I say? That a genetically modified monster had hotwired it. They'd have sued me for insurance fraud. Local news covered the deaths of Deputies Miller and Hayes. The stories all matched. Black bear attack, tragic circumstances, heroes who died protecting civilians. At the funeral, which I attended despite knowing I shouldn't, Miller's widow thanked me for trying to save her husband's life. I nodded and said nothing because any words I spoke would have been lies. 3 months later, a package arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a single item, a photograph. The image showed a concrete facility, industrial and sterile. In the frame were 12 containment units, each one housing a creature similar to the one we'd killed but with variations. Some were larger, some had different colorations. One appeared to have 4 arms instead of 2. In the corner of the photo, stamped in red ink, was a designation: Black Ridge Biological Solutions, Facility 7, authorized personnel only. There was no note, no explanation, just the photograph and an implicit message: this is real, this is ongoing, this is bigger than you know. I burned the photograph in my kitchen sink, but I'd already memorized every detail. The facility number, the company name, the creatures. I started researching Black Ridge Biological Solutions. The company didn't officially exist. No website, no incorporation records, no public presence. But deep in archived news articles from the 1990s, I found references to a biotech firm with a similar name that had received defense contracts for classified research. The trail went cold after that, buried under national security classifications and sealed records. I also found other stories, not many, and most of them dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, but scattered across hunting forums and hiking blogs were accounts that matched what we'd experienced. Large bipedal creatures, aggressive, apparently bulletproof, appearing in remote areas of national forests. The accounts were always dismissed, deleted by moderators, or explained away as bears or mentally ill individuals. But I knew better now. Those weren't hoaxes. Those were escaped experiments, or failed containment incidents, or deliberate releases for field testing. Somewhere, someone was breeding these things, training them, studying them, and when they outlived their usefulness or became too dangerous, they were being disposed of in places where witnesses could be discredited. Lucy started having nightmares around month 4. She'd wake up screaming about something watching her from the closet, something with gold eyes and too many teeth. The psychologist increased her sessions to twice a week and suggested medication. I refused. Medicating her wouldn't change what she'd seen. Instead, I taught her what my drill instructors had taught me. Fear is information, not paralysis. What you fear, you can fight. What you can fight, you can survive. I also started sleeping with the rifle next to my bed, loaded and ready. Tyler called occasionally to check in, always using a burner phone, always keeping the conversation short and vague. He'd moved twice since the incident, changing apartments each time he thought he saw someone following him. Paranoia, maybe? Or maybe justified caution when you've killed something the government doesn't want anyone to know exists. 2 years passed. Lucy turned 10. The nightmares decreased in frequency but never fully stopped. I changed jobs, moving from construction management to a position with a private security firm that asked fewer questions about my constant vigilance and tendency to sit with my back to walls. Tyler got married, a quiet ceremony I attended with Lucy. His wife was a good woman who didn't ask about the scar above his right eye or why he sometimes flinched at unexpected sounds. Some questions are better left unasked in a marriage. The Allegheny National Forest remained open. Hunters went there every fall. Hikers used the trails every summer. The ranger shelter where we'd eaten lunch still stood, maintained by the Forest Service, mentioned in guidebooks as a scenic rest stop. Deputies Miller and Hayes got memorial plaques at the sheriff's office. Their deaths were attributed to a black bear that was never found but assumed to have moved deeper into the forest or been hit by a car and died elsewhere. The official file was closed. Unofficially, things were different. I'd started collecting information, cross-referencing news reports with disappearances in national forests across Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. The pattern was subtle but present. Periodic spikes in missing persons cases, always in remote areas, always explained away as lost hikers or hunting accidents. The bodies that were found showed damage consistent with large predator attacks, massive trauma, bite marks, evidence of being dragged, but the pattern was too regular, too clustered around specific locations, and when I plotted those locations on a map, they formed a rough circle around areas where defense contractors had facilities or where the government owned large tracts of land under national security restrictions. I couldn't prove anything. Every time I tried to dig deeper, I hit walls. Classified information, sealed records, websites that suddenly went offline. Once my computer was remotely wiped while I was researching, every file deleted, the hard drive formatted. I'd learned to keep backups by then, stored on physical drives hidden in 3 separate locations. Tyler thought I was becoming obsessed. He was probably right. But someone needed to pay attention. Someone needed to remember that 2 deputies died because something was let loose in those woods, and that same something was still out there in various forms, being tested or deployed or disposed of. On the 3rd anniversary of the incident, Lucy asked me to tell her the truth. She was 11 now, old enough to understand lies even if she wasn't old enough to process certain realities. We sat on the apartment balcony, looking out at the Pittsburgh skyline. I told her everything, what we'd seen, what it meant, what I'd learned since. I expected her to be angry at me for lying. Instead, she just nodded. I remember it having numbers on its skin, she said quietly. I remember thinking someone made it. Someone who didn't care that it was alive. That was the part that haunted me most. Not the violence or the danger, but the casual cruelty of creating something sentient only to treat it as disposable property. The creature had looked at me with confusion before it died, unable to understand why it was being killed for doing what it was made to do. Why doesn't anyone stop them? Lucy asked. Because admitting they exist means admitting what was done to create them. Genetic experimentation on that scale, probably on human subjects initially, definitely on primates, it would be the biggest scandal in American history. Everyone involved would go to prison. So instead they classify it, hide it, and eliminate witnesses who can't be discredited. We're still alive, Lucy pointed out, because we signed nothing, said nothing publicly, and have no proof beyond our testimony. We're not threats. We're just traumatized civilians who saw a black bear and panicked. Lucy thought about that. Are you going to keep investigating? Yes. Why? Because deputies Miller and Hayes deserve justice. Because that creature deserved acknowledgement that it had lived and suffered and died. Because somewhere, more of them were being created or held or released, and eventually someone else's daughter would be chased through the woods by something that shouldn't exist. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I told Lucy, because someone has to remember. Someone has to bear witness. She accepted that answer. We sat in silence, watching the sun set over the city, both of us thinking about forests and darkness and things that moved through the trees with amber eyes. The motorhome incident became family legend in a strange way. The time Dad and Uncle Tyler survived a bear attack. Told with emphasis on our quick thinking and the deputy's heroism, Lucy learned to tell the story without flinching, editing out the parts that gave her nightmares, focusing on survival and courage. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I take out the copies of my research, the maps, the articles, the patterns I've documented, and I add to them more disappearances, more unexplained attacks, more evidence of something being systematically covered up. Tyler was right that night in my apartment. If they made one, they made more. And if one got loose, others will too. The Allegheny National Forest is behind us now, 200 miles away, a place we never talk about visiting again. But the silence of those woods remains with me, that hard, unnatural quiet that fell before the creature appeared, that held breath moment when the forest itself seemed to wait for violence. Sometimes I hear similar silence in my apartment late at night, no traffic noise, no neighbors, no ambient city sounds. And in that silence I imagine hearing something in the stairwell, something climbing toward my floor with claws clicking on concrete. Something with amber eyes and government barcodes tattooed on its skin. The official record says Black Bear. The official record is a lie. My name is Graham Pierce. What I've told you happened in September of 2017 in western Pennsylvania. If you've read this far, you deserve to know the truth. Those things exist. They're still out there. And the people who made them have no intention of stopping. I still keep the Marlin rifle next to my bed, loaded with 7 rounds. Sometimes Lucy asks if I really think it would do any good. I tell her yes, even though we both know the truth. The rifle isn't about stopping whatever might come through the door. It's about the illusion of control, the feeling that I can fight back against forces that have already demonstrated they're beyond my ability to oppose. But at least I can bear witness. At least I can remember. And if you're reading this, you can remember too. Because the first defense against darkness is acknowledging that the darkness exists. The forest is empty now, they say. Tourist season continues. Hunters still bag deer every fall. Nothing unusual has been reported since that September day in 2017. But I know better. The silence out there isn't peace, it's waiting. And someday, in some other forest, in some other state, another family is going to encounter something they can't explain. Another child is going to see amber eyes watching from the tree-line. Another parent is going to fire bullets into flesh that should be dead but refuses to fall. When that happens, and it will happen, I hope they survive. I hope they're smarter than I was, faster than I was, luckier than Deputies Miller and Hayes were, and I hope they remember. Because memory is all we have against things that officially don't exist. The Allegheny National Forest is behind us. But its lessons remain. The silence between the trees, the weight of amber eyes, the knowledge that we share this world with things we're not supposed to know about, things that bear the marks of human cruelty in their flesh, things that die hard and leave questions that can never be answered. God help us all if they ever stop containing them. God help us if those facilities ever open their doors and let everything inside walk free. Until then, I keep watch. I track patterns. I remember, and I sleep with one eye open, listening for the sound of claws on concrete, ready for the moment when the waiting silence ends and something comes home to finish what it started 3 years ago in the Allegheny wilderness. My name is Graham Pierce. This is my testimony. This is what happened when my daughter, my brother, and I went hiking in a place that maps say is safe. The maps are wrong. The silence continues. I never wanted to be a park ranger at Glacier National Park. The isolation, the brutal winters, the vast stretches of wilderness that swallow people whole. None of it appealed to me. But when my grandmother Macaulay passed away, leaving me her cabin on the eastern edge of the park, something inside me shifted. Her final letter said I needed to return to the land that birthed our ancestors. Macaulay was half Blackfeet, and though I'd grown up disconnected from that heritage, her words haunted me. The cabin sat on a private inholding, one of the few remaining within park boundaries. It was nestled between dense pine forest and a small, mirror-like lake that reflected the mountains with perfect clarity on still days. When I arrived in early October, the aspen trees had already turned golden, their leaves quivering like nervous whispers in the wind. My name is Newtow, fire, in Algonquin. My mother chose it to honor a distant branch of our family tree, though most people back in Chicago called me Nate. Park Service paperwork used my legal name, and when I introduced myself to my new supervisor, Ranger Davis, he raised an eyebrow. "Interesting name," he said, scanning my file. "Says here you've got a cabin inside the park?" "My grandmother's place. Just inherited it." Davis peered at me over reading glasses. "Lucky. Those in holdings are worth millions now. You planning to sell?" I shook my head. It's been in the family for generations. He seemed satisfied with that. Well, we're short-staffed heading into winter. Most seasonal rangers clear out by November. You sure you want to stay through? That's the plan, I said, though uncertainty gnawed at me. I'd quit my marketing job in Chicago, loaded my Subaru with everything I owned, and driven west with only the vaguest notion of what awaited me. The training was brief. Davis showed me how to operate the radio systems, the emergency protocols, basic first aid beyond what I already knew, wildlife handling procedures. My patrol area would include the eastern wilderness section and several remote trails that few visitors used after the first snow. Mostly you'll be checking for illegal campers, assisting anyone who gets lost, and monitoring wildlife activity, Davis explained. Oh, and keeping an eye out for poachers. We've had issues recently. That first week, I settled into my grandmother's cabin. The interior smelled of cedar and pine smoke, with walls lined with bookshelves full of worn volumes, field guides, local history, and curiously several books on Blackfeet and Algonquin folklore. One leather-bound journal caught my attention. Inside, I found Macaui's handwriting, documenting strange occurrences in the park stretching back decades. October 18, 1983, something took down an elk near Swift Current Creek. Rangers said it was a grizzly, but the tracks tell a different story. The prints changed halfway through the chase. The elders would say it's best not to speak of such things. I flipped through more pages, finding similar entries scattered throughout years of observations. The final entry, dated just 3 weeks before her death, sent a chill through me. They're growing hungrier as winter approaches. The old stories warned us. When the ice returns, so do they. I've left supplies in the root cellar. The door is iron for a reason. I closed the journal, dismissing it as the ramblings of an old woman whose mind had begun to wander. Still, that night, as wind howled through the pines and rattled the cabin's windows, I found myself checking that the doors were locked, the sturdy iron root cellar door included. My first solo patrol came after a week of shadowing Davis. The sky hung low and heavy with the promise of snow as I hiked up the Pyrmigan Trail, radio clipped to my belt. The late October air bit at my exposed skin, and my breath formed clouds that lingered before being whipped away by the wind. 4 miles in, I found the first sign something was wrong. A backpack sat abandoned beside the trail, its contents scattered as though someone had searched through it frantically. No blood, no signs of struggle, just personal belongings strewn across dead pine needles. I radioed it in. "Any ID?" Davis asked through static. I found a wallet. Gregory Walsh, Montana driver's license. That's our missing hiker from yesterday. His wife reported he didn't return to their hotel. I gathered the belongings, methodically photographing the scene. Any chance he could have made it to one of the backcountry shelters? Possible. Nearest one's 3 miles up. Check it out, but be back before dark. As I continued up the trail, the forest grew denser, and shadows stretched longer despite it being midday. The temperature dropped noticeably. Something rustled in the underbrush to my left, and I froze, hand moving to the bear spray on my belt. A snowshoe hare burst from beneath a fallen log, its coat already turning white for winter. The shelter appeared after another hour of hiking, a simple 3-sided wooden structure built into a hillside. From 50 yards away, I knew something was wrong. Dark smears marked the entrance, and the area around it showed signs of disturbance. Drawing closer, I recognized the smears as blood. Too much blood for someone to have survived losing it. Inside the shelter, a sleeping bag lay shredded, its stuffing scattered like entrails. A boot sat in the corner, still containing a sock. No foot. The radio crackled when I reported the scene. A search team would be assembled, but darkness was coming and no one would reach me before nightfall. "Head back immediately," Davis ordered. "We'll send a full team at first light." I snapped photos, my hand steadier than I expected given what I was documenting. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Markings gouged into the shelter's wooden back wall. Not random claw marks, but deliberate symbols similar to those I'd seen in Macaui's books on Algonquin folklore. A warning, perhaps, or a message. Halfway back to the trailhead, snow began to fall in thick, wet flakes that clung to the pines and obscured the path. The light faded faster than it should have, and I flicked on my flashlight. Its beam seemed swallowed by the gathering gloom. A sound stopped me. A low, moaning call that wasn't quite human but couldn't be animal either. It echoed through the trees, impossible to pinpoint. Then silence, heavy and oppressive. I quickened my pace, stumbling once on a route hidden beneath early snow. The forest had never felt so alive around me, so aware of my presence. When I reached my truck, I sat inside for several minutes, heater blasting, trying to slow my racing heart. That night, back at the cabin, I pulled out Makawi's journal again and found an entry from 30 years ago describing similar symbols found carved near the same shelter. Her words echoed in my mind as I drifted into uneasy sleep. They mark their hunting grounds. The Wendigo never forgets the taste of man. The search team found nothing the next day beyond what I'd already documented. No body, no additional blood trails leading away from the shelter. Gregory Walsh disappeared into the wilderness without a trace, joining the statistics of people who venture into national parks and never emerge. Sometimes nature just takes people, Davis said after the search was called off. Could have been a grizzly that dragged the remains away. I nodded, knowing what I'd seen didn't match any bear attack pattern from my training. The marks on the wall haunted me, deliberate symbols that spoke of intelligence behind the violence. November arrived with a vengeance. Snow fell in thick blankets that transformed the landscape into something alien and pristine. My patrols became shorter but more grueling, limited by daylight and weather conditions. The park emptied of visitors except for the occasional winter enthusiast, and even the ranger station operated with minimal staff. 2 weeks after the Walsh disappearance, I was checking the boundaries near my cabin when I found the first set of tracks. They began as deer prints in the snow, perfectly normal except for their depth. Whatever made them was heavier than any whitetail I'd encountered. 50 yards later, the tracks changed. The spacing widened and the impression deepened. Most disturbing were the clear marks of what looked like humanoid toes replacing the hooves, as if the creature had transformed mid-stride. I photographed them meticulously, then followed their path. They led to the frozen edge of my grandmother's lake where a perfect circle of ice had been broken and refrozen. Dark water gazed up like an eye from the white expanse. That evening, sitting before the fireplace in the cabin, I opened Makawi's journal again and read until I found what I was looking for. November 8, 1992, the tracks always change. The old stories say they begin as something familiar to lure you forward. By the time you notice the difference, you've already been following too long. The Wendigo was human once. That's what makes it dangerous. It remembers how we think. I slammed the book shut and poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey. Folklore, superstition, nothing more. And yet the image of those tracks morphing from animal to something else lingered in my mind. The radio crackled around midnight, startling me from a doze in my chair. "Ranger Newtow, do you copy?" The voice was unfamiliar, distorted by static. I grabbed the handset. "This is Newtow. Who's calling?" "Hiker, lost, East Ridge Trail." The transmission broke apart, words fighting through waves of interference. I checked the clock. Midnight patrols weren't standard, especially in November conditions. "Identify yourself. Over. Help? Need help." The voice sounded wrong somehow. The cadence mechanical, like someone mimicking human speech patterns they didn't quite understand. Protocol dictated I alert the main station before responding to any emergency call. I tried reaching Davis, but only static answered. Outside, the wind had died completely, leaving an unnatural stillness. Through the window, the dark surface of the lake reflected moonlight like polished obsidian. The radio crackled again. "Coming. To your cabin." Ice formed in my veins. I hadn't mentioned my location. Moving quickly, I extinguished the lights and checked the locks. The iron door to the root cellar drew my attention. My grandmother's words about supplies stored there nagged at me. I descended the narrow stairs, flashlight beam dancing over preserved food, tools, and camping equipment organized with military precision. In the far corner stood a locked chest. The key hung on a nail beside it, wrapped in red cloth. Inside, I found items that made little sense together. Bundles of dried herbs tied with sinew, a horn-handled knife with symbols etched into the blade that matched those from the shelter wall, jars of unknown substances, and a bound manuscript titled simply, "The Hunger." I took the manuscript upstairs and began reading by flashlight, hunched beneath a blanket to hide any light from the windows. The text described a creature born of human desperation and starvation, a spirit that possessed those who resorted to cannibalism during harsh winters. Once transformed, the Wendigo existed in a state of perpetual, insatiable hunger that grew with each feeding. Most disturbing were the descriptions of its ability to mimic human voices and appearance, almost perfectly, save for subtle wrongness in proportion and movement. A sound from outside interrupted my reading, the crunch of footsteps in snow, circling the cabin's perimeter, too heavy for deer, too deliberate for bear. I extinguished my flashlight and moved silently to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Moonlight illuminated a figure standing at the edge of the trees. Its proportions were wrong, limbs too long, torso too narrow. It stood perfectly still, face tilted toward my cabin, antlers crowning its head like a grotesque corona. As I watched, it dropped to all fours in a motion no deer could make and disappeared into the forest. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I followed tracks that circled my cabin 7 times before leading back toward the lake. At the shoreline, they simply stopped, as if whatever made them had dissolved into the air. That afternoon, I returned to the ranger station to file my reports. Davis looked concerned when I described finding more abandoned equipment on the eastern trails. "We've had 3 missing persons reports in the past week," he said. "All solo hikers, experienced outdoorsmen." "In November?" I asked. "That's unusual." "Very, that's why I called in some help." He gestured to a woman organizing topographical maps at a nearby table. "This is Dr. Renee Locklear from the University of Montana, anthropologist specializing in indigenous folklore of the region." The woman glanced up, dark eyes assessing me sharply. "You're the ranger with the Blackfeet heritage?" "Partially," I admitted. "My grandmother was half Blackfeet." "Makawi," she said, not a question. "I corresponded with her for years about local legends. When I heard her grandson had taken a ranger position here, I wondered if it was coincidence." Something in her tone suggested she didn't believe in coincidences. "Dr. Locklear is helping us understand some unusual aspects of these disappearances," Davis explained uncomfortably. "Like the symbols carved at the sites," she added. "Algonquin protection wards, very specific to Wendigo lore." Davis cleared his throat. "We're considering all possibilities. Bears, mountain lions, even human predators." "And yet you called me," Locklear noted dryly. Turning to me, she asked, "Have you found her journal yet?" The question caught me off guard. "How did you know about that?" "Because Makawi documented everything, and she knew what was happening in these woods. She also knew it would return, and that blood calls to blood." Her gaze intensified. "The Wendigo legends aren't just stories, Ranger Newtow. Indigenous peoples didn't have the luxury of creating fiction about things that could kill them." That evening, returning to my cabin, I found fresh tracks in the new fallen snow. Human boot prints approaching my door. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed, but centered on my kitchen table sat a small object that hadn't been there before. A carved bone whistle, yellowed with age, symbols matching those from the shelter wall etched into its surface. Beneath it lay a note in unfamiliar handwriting. "When it calls your name, don't answer. When it wears a familiar face, don't trust. Blood calls to blood." Outside, darkness fell like a curtain, and from somewhere across the frozen lake came a sound that might have been the wind, or might have been my name, called in a voice that almost, but not quite, sounded human. The 3rd disappearance happened when I was on patrol near Logan Pass. A cross-country skier vanished along a ridge typically considered safe, leaving behind only scattered equipment and those same disturbing tracks, beginning as human boot prints before elongating into something impossible. I took photographs and measurements, then radioed the details to Davis. The temperature hovered around 15 degrees, the sky a brilliant, mocking blue above snow-laden pines. Everything appeared peaceful except for the unnatural silence, no birds, no rustling creatures in the underbrush. The forest held its breath around the scene. When I returned to the ranger station that evening, Dr. Locklear waited with a grim expression. She'd spread topographical maps across a table, marking the locations of all 3 disappearances with red pins. "Look at the pattern," she said without preamble. The pins formed a rough circle, with my grandmother's cabin near the center. "You think this is targeted?" I asked, reluctant to voice the implication. "Wendigo folklore is consistent on one point," she replied. "They're territorial creatures with perfect memories. If your grandmother confronted one, you can't seriously believe these disappearances are caused by a mythological creature," I interrupted. She raised an eyebrow. "What do you think is happening, Ranger?" I had no answer that fit the evidence. The transformed tracks, the deliberate symbols, the voice on the radio that knew where I lived. None of it aligned with natural predator behavior or human criminal activity. Davis entered, looking exhausted. "Search teams found nothing new. We're suspending operations until morning." "You need to close the eastern section of the park," Locklear insisted. "On what grounds?" "Mysterious footprints and Native American ghost stories." Davis shook his head. "The superintendent would laugh me out of office." "People are dying," she pressed. "We have missing hikers," he corrected. No bodies, no confirmed deaths. I thought of the boot I'd found at the first scene, still containing a sock. I need to check something in my grandmother's journal, I said suddenly. There might be precedent for this pattern. Back at the cabin, I pored over Macaulay's writings until I found what I was looking for. Entries from the winter of 1978-79, describing 5 disappearances in almost identical locations to our current cases. February 3rd, 1979, the Park Service blames the deaths on a rogue grizzly, despite knowing bears hibernate this time of year. The marks I found tell the truth. I've left offerings at the boundary stones. Blood calls to blood. My father taught me this. What hunts these woods remembers those who've challenged it before. A knock at the door startled me. Through the window I saw Dr. Locklear standing on my porch, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. I need to show you something, she said when I opened the door. Something your grandmother gave me for safekeeping. From her bag she produced a wrapped bundle. Inside lay an ancient-looking knife with a handle fashioned from antler, its blade darkened with age. The same symbols from the shelter walls and the bone whistle had been etched into the metal. This is one of only 3 Wendigo blades known to exist, she explained. The metal was supposedly tempered with human blood, a hunter who sacrificed himself to save his village. Why would my grandmother have this? Because she used it. Winter of 79, she tracked what was hunting in these woods and wounded it badly enough that it retreated. Locklear's expression hardened. But Wendigos don't die easily. They go dormant, healing, waiting. Your grandmother knew it would return someday, which is why she prepared you. Prepared me? I never even met her until I was a teenager, and yet here you are, in her cabin, with her journal, following the same paths. She gestured to the horn-handled knife I'd found in the root cellar, a modern twin to the ancient blade she'd brought. She left you everything you need. I was about to respond when the radio crackled to life. Newtow, help me. The voice was Davis's, strained with pain or fear. I grabbed the handset. Davis, what's your location? Near the old fire tower. Injured. Something's out here. Locklear seized my arm. Don't go. That's not him. I stared at her. How can you be sure? Because I just left Davis at the station 20 minutes ago. Her grip tightened. It's learning, using voices you trust. The radio crackled again. This time the voice was different. A perfect mimicry of my own. Nutao, come find me. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the winter air. I set the radio down slowly. How do we stop it? I asked. Your grandmother wounded it with the blade but didn't kill it. According to the old stories, you need to pierce its heart and then burn the remains. She hesitated. There's something else. Wendigos are drawn to their own kind. What does that mean? It means there's a reason it's circling your cabin, focusing its hunt around you. Her eyes met mine. Blood calls to blood, Ranger. Your grandmother challenged it, marked it. Now it wants revenge, and it sees that blood in you. That night, we reinforced the cabin's defenses. Salt across thresholds, Locklear insisted it helped. Symbols carved into doorframes, both knives placed strategically. I wondered if we looked like lunatics, preparing for a monster from folklore rather than flesh and blood predators. Around midnight, the temperature plummeted unnaturally. Frost formed on the inside of the windows, spiraling in patterns that resembled the symbols from Macaulay's journal. The fire in the hearth dimmed despite the logs I added, as if something were sucking the warmth from the room. It's testing the boundaries, Locklear whispered. Outside, something circled the cabin, its footsteps crunching deliberately in the snow, pausing at each window as if peering inside. The radio on the table came to life without being activated, cycling through voices I recognized. Davis, then the missing hikers based on recordings from their families' pleas, then my own voice again, calling my name. The night stretched endlessly, each minute crawling by in tense silence broken only by the thing outside testing our defenses, trying doors and windows, scraping at walls. Near dawn, the assault suddenly ceased. The unnatural cold lingered, but the presence withdrew. When morning light finally broke through the frost-covered windows, we ventured outside to find the tracks. They circled the cabin dozens of times, occasionally approaching doors or windows before retreating. At the lake's edge, they were joined by older tracks, multiple sets, some fresh, some partially filled with snow. It's bringing them here, I realized aloud. The missing people. Locklear nodded grimly. Not people anymore. When a Wendigo feeds, it doesn't just take life, it transforms. The victims become like it, driven by the same hunger. I studied the frozen surface of the lake. There's something under there. The circle of broken and refrozen ice I'd noticed days earlier had expanded. now a dark eye about 12 feet in diameter staring up from the white expanse. Something about its perfect roundness suggested deliberate creation rather than natural thawing. "We need to see what's down there," I said. "No," Locklear replied firmly. "That's exactly what it wants. To separate us, lure us into vulnerable positions." But I couldn't shake the feeling that answers lay beneath that dark surface. After reporting to the ranger station, where Davis confirmed he'd been there all night, never making the radio call I'd heard, I returned to the cabin and gathered equipment: rope, ice axe, underwater flashlight, dry suit I used for summer lake surveys. Locklear argued vehemently against my plan, but finally relented on the condition that she would be my anchor on shore, ready to pull me out at the first sign of trouble. The ice was thick around the edges of the hole, at least 8 inches, making its perfectly circular shape all the more unsettling. Who or what had the strength to cut through such solid ice with such precision? I secured the rope harness around my chest and waist, double-checking the knots while Locklear prepared the anchor system on shore. The dry suit would protect against hypothermia, but not for long in these temperatures. 15 minutes maximum, she instructed. 3 tugs on the rope means pull you out immediately. I nodded, heart pounding as I approached the edge of the ice hole. The water below appeared unnaturally dark, swallowing my flashlight beam rather than reflecting it. With a deep breath, I lowered myself into the frigid water. The cold attacked despite the dry suit, seeming to penetrate directly to my bones. I swept the flashlight beam through murky darkness, struggling to orient myself. Beneath me, the lake bottom should have been visible at about 20 feet, but I saw only impenetrable blackness. Something glinted about 15 feet down. I dove deeper, the rope trailing behind me like an umbilical cord to the surface world. As I approached, the object took shape. A metal box, the kind used for waterproof storage, resting on what appeared to be a natural underwater shelf. I reached for it, fingers nearly brushing its surface, when movement caught the corner of my eye. Something large and pale, sliding through the water just beyond my flashlight beam. I froze, pulse hammering in my ears. The shape didn't approach, remaining just at the periphery of visibility. Was it human? Animal? The proportions seemed wrong for either, elongated and gaunt. As I watched, it circled, always keeping the same distance, always just beyond clear sight. I grabbed the box and tugged the rope 3 times in rapid succession. The response was immediate, a sharp pull, dragging me toward the surface. As I ascended, the pale shape darted forward with impossible speed. Cold fingers, too long, too thin to be human, brushed against my ankle before I broke the surface, gasping and scrambling onto solid ice. Locklear helped drag me fully clear, her face tense with concentration as she pulled me away from the hole. Only when we'd reached shore did she speak. "Did you see it?" I nodded, unable to form words through chattering teeth. The metal box sat beside me, its surface covered in a thin film of ice already forming in the frigid air. Inside the cabin, warmed by fresh logs on the fire and wrapped in blankets, I finally examined our find. The box's lock had corroded underwater, breaking easily with minimal force. Inside, protected by the watertight seal, we found a leather-bound book similar to Macaui's journal but far older, its pages yellow with age. The text inside was written in a language I didn't recognize, but Locklear inhaled sharply when she saw it. "This is Algonquin, ancient dialect," she said. "Where was this hidden?" "Underwater shelf, about 15 feet down." I hesitated. Something was down there with it. Watching. Guarding, maybe. She began carefully translating sections, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "This belonged to a medicine man who first documented Wendigo encounters in this region," she explained. "According to this, the creature was once a tribal chief who resorted to cannibalism during a brutal winter, then developed a taste for it. His transformation was the first. He created others. How was he stopped? He wasn't. The tribe abandoned their traditional hunting grounds to escape him." She turned more pages. "But there's something here about a ritual, a way to draw the Wendigo to a specific location and trap it." Outside, the short winter day was already fading into dusk. From somewhere in the darkening forest came a sound that raised the hair on my neck, a perfect imitation of my grandmother's voice calling my name. Morning brought 6 inches of fresh snow and news of another disappearance, a park maintenance worker who'd been clearing access roads near the eastern boundary. His snowplow was found still running, driver's door open, a single set of tracks leading from the vehicle into the woods. Davis looked haggard when I reported to the station, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "The superintendent is finally taking this seriously," he said. "They're closing the eastern section effective immediately and bringing in wildlife experts from Missoula." "Wildlife experts won't help," I told him. then hesitated. How could I explain what Locklear and I had discovered? That something ancient and hungry was stalking the park, something that defied scientific classification. I know, Davis admitted, surprising me. I've worked these woods for 22 years. Whatever's out there isn't like anything I've encountered before. He rubbed his face. Your grandmother warned me, you know. Back in '79, after they blamed the deaths on a rogue bear, said something would return one day, and when it did, I should listen to her blood. You believe her? I didn't then. Now? He gestured to the map where 5 red pins marked the disappearances, forming a tightening circle around my cabin. I don't know what I believe anymore. When I returned to the cabin, Locklear had translated more of the ancient text. The ritual described in the book required specific components: a circle drawn with ash from sacred wood, offerings of personal significance, and most troublingly, blood from someone connected to the Wendigo, either a previous victim or someone who had encountered it before. Your grandmother wounded it, Locklear reminded me. That created a connection. She's dead, I pointed out, but you carry her blood. Her expression was solemn. The ritual needs bait, Nutao. Someone the Wendigo wants badly enough to approach despite knowing it might be a trap. The implication hung heavy between us. I would be the bait. We spent the day preparing. The ritual would need to be performed at a place of significance. The underwater shelf where the book had been hidden seemed the obvious choice. According to the text, Wendigos were most vulnerable during the darkest phase of the moon, which coincided with that very night. As dusk approached, we gathered what we needed. Ash from cedar burned in my grandmother's fireplace, the ancient knife Locklear had brought, a vial for my blood, and items from each of the missing persons that had been collected as evidence. A watch, a bootlace, a keychain, a glove, a Park Service badge. Davis arrived as we were loading the final supplies, his truck headlights cutting through thickening darkness. I should have reported you both for interfering with an investigation, he said, stepping onto the porch. Instead, I'm here to help. Locklear eyed him cautiously. Why the change of heart? Because I found these in the maintenance shed. He held out a manila envelope. Inside were photographs from 1979. The previous disappearances Makawi had documented in her journal. One image showed a tree marked with the same symbols we'd found at the shelter. Another showed tracks in snow, transitioning from human to something else. The official report blamed a bear, Davis continued. But these were hidden in a locked cabinet with a note saying they should be destroyed. Your grandmother must have kept them as evidence. The plan crystallized quickly. Davis would maintain a perimeter with his rifle loaded with special rounds Locklear had prepared. Bullets carved with the same symbols as the knife blades, and filled with a mixture of herbs and ash. Locklear would conduct the ritual on the lakeshore while I ventured onto the ice to serve as bait. Night fell completely as we made final preparations. The moon, just past new, provided almost no light, leaving us dependent on headlamps and flashlights. The temperature had plummeted to well below zero, making the air painful to breathe. We positioned ourselves around the frozen lake, Davis concealed at the tree line with his rifle, Locklear at the shoreline preparing the ritual circle, and me walking slowly toward the center where the large hole in the ice waited like a portal to another world. The ice creaked beneath my feet but held secure. I carried both knives, the ancient one and its modern twin, secured at my belt. Every few steps I paused to listen. The forest had gone completely silent, not even the whisper of wind disturbing the oppressive stillness. 20 feet from the ice hole, I stopped and turned slowly in a complete circle, scanning the darkness beyond my light beam. Nothing moved on the frozen expanse, yet I felt watched from all directions. It's here, I called back to Locklear. I can feel it, she nodded, completing the ash circle and placing the personal items of the missing at cardinal points. We need your blood now. I removed my glove and drew the modern knife across my palm, letting drops fall into the small vial Locklear had prepared. The wound stung viciously in the cold air as she added my blood to the ritual components. A sound echoed across the lake. My name, called in my grandmother's voice, seeming to emanate from the ice hole itself. Don't answer, Locklear warned. No matter what voices you hear, the voices multiplied, rising from the forest and the ice and the dark water below. Each missing person calling out, pleading for help, crying in pain. Among them, my grandmother's voice grew strongest, most insistent. Nuto, they've taken me down here. Help me, grandson. I forced myself to focus on Locklear as she began reciting words from the ancient text, her voice carrying through the frigid air. The ritual had begun. The ice beneath my feet vibrated subtly, then more intensely. Cracks formed around the central hole, spreading outward like a spider web. I backed away, but the fractures followed my movements as if deliberately tracking me. From the hole, something emerged, not rising from the water, but seeming to form from it, ice crystallizing into a humanoid shape that grew taller and more defined with each second. It took form before my eyes, gaunt limbs too long for its torso, fingers extending into claw-like points, a head crowned with ice formations resembling antlers. Its face was the most disturbing aspect, features almost human but stretched and distorted, mouth extending too wide across its face, eyes sunken and glowing with pale blue light. As it fully materialized, I recognized elements of each missing person in its appearance. A Park Service badge embedded in its chest, a glove seemingly melded to one elongated hand, a boot forming part of one misshapen foot. Behind it, more figures began emerging from the water. Smaller versions of the first, their features blending human and animal aspects in nauseating combinations. The missing people, transformed into Wendigo spawn. "Keep it in the circle," Locklear shouted. The primary Wendigo took a step toward me, ice cracking beneath its impossible weight. Its mouth opened, wider than any human mouth could, and spoke with my grandmother's voice. "Blood calls to blood. You came back to me." I held my ground, both knives now drawn. "You're not her." "No. But I remember her." The creature's head tilted at an impossible angle. "She marked me, as I will mark you." It lunged forward with shocking speed. I ducked beneath elongated arms, slashing upward with the ancient knife. The blade connected, drawing a sound like cracking ice from the creature. Where I cut, blue-black liquid oozed like frozen sap. The smaller Wendigos spread out, forming a circle that cut off my retreat to shore. From the tree line came the crack of Davis's rifle. One of the creatures staggered but didn't fall. Locklear's voice rose in volume, the ritual words coming faster now. The ash circle on the shore began to glow with subtle blue light that matched the Wendigo's eyes. The primary creature recovered quickly from my strike, moving with unnatural grace across the fractured ice. It spoke again, but now in a cacophony of voices, all the missing persons at once. "Join us. The hunger never ends, but it becomes everything." I feinted left, then dodged right, trying to lead it toward Locklear's ritual circle. It followed, but cautiously, seeming aware of the trap. "You've been here before," I called to it, remembering Makawi's journal. "You know this place, this lake. I know all who have tasted flesh in these mountains. Your grandmother, your ancestors, you." The accusation struck like a physical blow. "I've never." "The hunger is in your blood, dormant, waiting." The creature's mouth stretched in a grotesque approximation of a smile. "Why do you think you came here?" I backed toward shore, keeping both knives raised. The ice continued fracturing beneath us, water beginning to seep through the cracks. The smaller Wendigos kept pace, maintaining their circle. Davis's rifle sounded again and again. Two more creatures stumbled but continued advancing. The special ammunition wounded them but couldn't kill. 10 feet from shore. 8. Locklear's chanting reached a crescendo, the ritual circle pulsing with brighter light. The primary Wendigo suddenly stopped, head tilting as it assessed the glowing circle. It knew the trap now. With a sound like shattering ice, it changed direction, lunging not for me but for Locklear. I reacted without thinking, throwing myself between them. Its claws tore through my jacket and into my shoulder, cold burning worse than fire. We crashed to the ice at the shoreline, half in Locklear's circle. The creature pinned me, face inches from mine, breath like the air from a slaughterhouse freezer. Its clawed hand raised for a killing blow, and froze as Locklear completed the final words of the ritual. The circle flared brilliant blue. The Wendigo shrieked, a sound of rage and pain that shattered ice across the lake. The smaller creatures converged, howling in similar agony. "The heart!" Locklear shouted. "Strike the heart now!" With my last strength, I drove both knives into the creature's chest, the ancient blade and its modern twin, one in each hand. The Wendigo convulsed, its body beginning to fracture like breaking ice, blue-black liquid pouring from the wounds and sizzling where it touched the ritual circle. Its final words came in my grandmother's voice, but distorted, breaking apart like its body. "Blood calls to blood." The creature collapsed inward, imploding rather than falling, its mass seeming to fold into the ritual circle which absorbed it like water into sand. The smaller Wendigos followed, drawn irresistibly into the same vortex of energy, shrieking as they dissolved. In seconds all were gone, consumed by whatever power Locklear had channeled. The glowing circle faded slowly, leaving only a scorched ring in the snow and ice. Davis reached us first, helping me to my feet. The wound in my shoulder burned with unnatural cold, the flesh around it blackening with frostbite. "Is it over?" he asked. Locklear collected the items from the ritual, now transformed, blackened as if burned. "For now. But the hunger never truly dies. It just waits." I looked at the frozen lake, now cracked and broken where the Wendigos had emerged. Beneath the fractured surface, shadows moved in the depths, too distant to see clearly, but present nonetheless. "We need to seal the lake," I said, remembering my grandmother's iron root cellar door. "All of it. This is where they come through." As dawn broke over the mountains, casting pink light across the shattered ice, I understood why my grandmother had left me the cabin, the journal, the weapons, why blood calls to blood. This wasn't just inheritance, it was responsibility. The Wendigo was gone, but its hunger remained, dormant beneath the frozen surface of these mountains. And someone needed to stand guard when winter returned. Spring came late to Glacier National Park. Snow lingered in shadowed valleys into May, and ice held stubbornly to the surface of higher lakes. My grandmother's lake was the last to thaw, its surface remaining solid weeks after others had surrendered to warming temperatures. The official report listed all 5 missing persons as presumed dead, victims of a territorial predator that had subsequently been neutralized through Joint Park Service and local expert intervention. Davis made sure Locklear received consulting fees for her assistance, though the true nature of what we'd encountered never appeared in official documentation. The wound in my shoulder healed slowly, leaving a handprint-shaped scar that ached when temperatures dropped. Locklear said this was to be expected. Wendigo touch carried lasting cold that never completely faded. A reminder, I stayed on as a permanent ranger, moving into my grandmother's cabin permanently. The books that had seemed like folklore collections now served as field guides for my real work, monitoring the boundaries between our world and whatever lay beneath the lake's surface. We reinforced those boundaries throughout spring and summer. Iron markers embedded at regular intervals around the lakeshore, each carved with protection symbols. A new dock built with specially treated wood, extending over the spot where the ice hole had formed. Below it, underwater cameras monitored the shelf where we'd found the ancient text. The cameras showed nothing unusual through spring and summer, but as autumn painted the aspen trees gold once more, strange disturbances began appearing on the recordings: shadow movements at the edge of visibility, brief temperature fluctuations that froze the water around the cameras before quickly dissipating. "It's testing the boundaries," Locklear explained during one of her regular visits. She'd taken a sabbatical from the university to document what we'd learned, creating a modern companion to the ancient text. The Wendigo itself is gone, but its influence remains. The hunger lingers. I understood this all too well. Since that night on the ice, my dreams had changed. Visions of running through snow-laden forests on limbs too long for my body, pursuing warmth and sustenance that remained eternally just beyond reach. I would wake gasping, the scar on my shoulder burning with cold. Locklear noticed my deterioration. "You need to tell me if it's getting worse," she insisted. "The connection works both ways. Blood calls to blood, remember?" "I'm fine," I assured her, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. On the anniversary of my arrival at the park, one full cycle of seasons, I hiked to the shelter where I'd found the first signs of the Wendigo. The bloodstains had long since weathered away, but the symbols remained carved into the back wall. I traced them with my fingers, feeling each groove and understanding their meaning now. Warnings, not threats. Barriers between worlds. That night, alone in my grandmother's cabin, my cabin now, I opened her journal to the final pages I hadn't yet read. Her handwriting grew shakier in these entries, the words more urgent. October 15th, 2023. "It's returning. I feel it beneath the ice, stirring from dormancy. My time is ending, but the vigil must continue. Blood calls to blood. New Tao will come when the signs appear. He carries the same awareness in his veins, though he doesn't know it yet. The hunger can be contained, but never destroyed. This is our burden to bear." I closed the book and moved to the window overlooking the lake. The surface reflected moonlight, tranquil and innocent. Beneath that beauty, I knew something waited. Hibernating perhaps, but never truly gone. The radio on my table crackled suddenly, though it wasn't turned on. Through static, a voice that might have been my grandmother's whispered my name. I didn't answer. Instead, I checked the locks, tested the iron reinforcements we'd installed, and placed both knives, ancient and modern, beside my bed. The Wendigo would return when winter sealed the mountains in ice once more, and I would be waiting, as my grandmother had waited before me. and her ancestors before her. Blood calls to blood. The hunger never ends, but neither does the vigil against it. My nighttime patrols through the foggy park became increasingly terrifying. I never planned on becoming a park ranger at Glacier National Park. 6 months ago, I was working in corporate finance in Seattle, drowning in spreadsheets and artificial office lighting. My therapist called it burnout. I called it a slow death. When the job listing appeared in my LinkedIn feed, seasonal ranger position, Glacier National Park, Montana, something deep inside me stirred. Perhaps it was nostalgia for the childhood camping trips with my father before he passed, or maybe just desperation for escape. Whatever it was, I applied that night. 3 weeks later, I arrived at the eastern edge of the park, at a remote ranger station called Ekiteta Outpost, named after a Blackfeet warrior who, according to local lore, vanished in these mountains 2 centuries ago while pursuing something neither man nor beast. The station supervisor, Rivera, a weathered woman with eyes that had seen too much wilderness, handed me my uniform with a strange hesitation. "Northridge Cabin is the only one available," she said, not quite meeting my gaze. "It's isolated, 20 minutes from the main road, but the view of Lake Kinla is worth it." I didn't mind isolation, that was the point, wasn't it? To escape humanity for a while. "One more thing," Rivera added as I turned to leave. "Stay on marked trails during your patrols, even during daylight, especially after dark." I laughed politely. "Bears, I'm guessing?" Her expression remained flat. Among other things, Northridge Cabin exceeded my expectations. Rustic cedar exterior, solar panels, a wood stove, and panoramic windows overlooking pristine Lake Kintla. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines, their shadows creating intricate patterns across the woodland floor. As I unpacked, I discovered a leather-bound journal wedged behind the dresser. The first entry, dated May 2023, read, "Something watches from the trees." The rest of the pages had been torn out. My training lasted 2 weeks. Wildlife encounters, search and rescue protocols, visitor management. I learned the park's 1,483 square miles of wilderness like the back of my hand. My primary patrol sector encompassed the northern trails, remote regions rarely visited except by the most experienced hikers. Fellow rangers warned me about standard dangers, grizzlies, sudden weather changes, lost hikers, but occasionally conversations would die when I approached. Twice I overheard mention of the winter incidents, though no one elaborated when I inquired. My first solo patrol happened on a crisp autumn day. The aspens blazed gold against the evergreens, and the mountains stood sentinel against a cloudless sky. I felt alive, purposeful. That night I wrote in my own journal, "I made the right choice coming here. If only I'd known what waited in the darkness." My night patrols began in my 4th week. The first few were uneventful, just the whisper of wind through pines and occasional rustling of nocturnal animals. I'd check the remote cameras, walk the designated trails with my flashlight cutting through the mist, and return to my cabin by dawn. Then came the night of the first snowfall. 3 inches of powder transformed the landscape into something ethereal. My boots crunched rhythmically as I made my way along Trail 8, my breath clouding before me. At the 5-mile marker, I noticed something unusual, a single track of footprints crossing the trail and continuing deeper into the woods. Human footprints too large for a child but oddly narrow, and far from any authorized camping area. Protocol dictated I report and track potential lost hikers. I radioed in my position and followed the prints. They led me half a mile off trail to an ancient pine, its trunk nearly 8 feet in diameter. The footprints circled the tree once, twice, then simply stopped. I scanned the area with my flashlight, the beam catching swirling snowflakes. "Hello?" My voice sounded small against the vastness. "Park Service, do you need assistance?" Something shifted in the branches above. Not the wind, something deliberate. I aimed my light upward, seeing nothing but snow-laden boughs. Then, a sound that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. A rhythmic clicking, like bone against bone. My radio crackled. "Base to Ranger 17, check in please." When I responded, my voice was steady despite my racing heart. "Ranger 17 here. False alarm. Returning to patrol route." As I turned to leave, my light caught something carved into the tree's bark at eye level. Fresh cuts that hadn't been there moments before. Hungry? I convinced myself it was a prank by hikers. Had to be. I photographed it, reported it as vandalism, and continued my rounds. But that night, lying in bed at the cabin, I heard that clicking sound again. distant but unmistakable through my partially open window. It continued for hours, moving through the forest, circling closer, then retreating. By morning I'd convinced myself it was just branches rubbing together in the wind. The alternative was unthinkable. 2 nights later, I found the first abandoned backpack on Trail 10. Inside, standard hiking gear, a half-eaten energy bar, a camera with no photos, and a journal containing a single entry. It's following us, not like a predator follows prey, like a child follows an interesting bug. No missing persons had been reported. When I brought the pack to Rivera, she locked it away without logging it into evidence. Hikers abandon gear all the time, she said dismissively. Shouldn't we file a report? I pressed. She fixed me with that same flat stare. Would you like a different patrol route? Perhaps daylight shifts only? I declined. Whatever was happening, I needed to understand it. As October deepened, so did my unease. Each night patrol revealed new oddities. Trees scored with strange markings, small animal carcasses arranged in geometric patterns, and twice more those peculiar footprints that started and stopped impossibly. The clicking sounds became my constant companion in the darkness, sometimes so close I could feel the vibration in my chest, other times distant like an echo from another valley. My dreams filled with shadowy figures standing motionless among trees, watching me with hungry patience. I'd wake gasping, convinced something was crouched at the foot of my bed, only to find nothing but moonlight painting patterns across my floor. Still, I stayed. Something about this wilderness had its hooks in me now. I needed answers more than I needed comfort. Little did I know that the true terror had not yet begun. The first substantial snowfall came in mid-November, burying Glacier Park under 2 feet of pristine white. The tourists had long since departed, leaving only the permanent rangers and seasonal staff like myself to witness the transformation. Lake Kintla froze over and the mountains loomed larger somehow, as if drawing closer in the cold. My patrol routes were shortened due to impassable conditions, but Rivera insisted we maintain surveillance of the northern trails. Winter is when we need to be most vigilant, she said during a staff meeting, her eyes briefly flickering to mine. Vigilant for what, exactly? I asked. The room fell silent. Only Ranger Dawson, an older man with a silver beard who rarely spoke, answered. Hungry things, he muttered, then excused himself. That night, I found my first tree ladder. It appeared on Trail 4, near the abandoned fire lookout, a crude ladder fashioned from branches tied with what looked like sinew, leaning against a towering pine. It reached at least 30 feet up, disappearing into the dense canopy. The snow around it was pristine and untouched, as if the ladder had materialized from thin air. I photographed it, circled it twice, and found no tracks besides my own. The construction was primitive yet effective. Each rung tested solid when I tugged. Against protocol and better judgment, I began to climb. The wood was ice cold beneath my gloves, but not frozen. Somehow it felt warm, almost alive. 10 feet up, I noticed carvings on the trunk, similar to what I'd seen before, but older, weathered by years or decades. Ascend to feed it. 20 feet up, the clicking began, not from above or below, but from inside the tree itself, as if something moved within the wood. I froze, listening. With each click, the ladder seemed to vibrate subtly against my hands. A sudden crack above made me look up. Through gaps in the branches, something moved. A pale, emaciated form, more elongated than a human should be, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. I caught only a glimpse before it retreated higher, but it was enough to send me scrambling down. My boots had barely touched snow when my radio burst to life. All rangers returned to base immediately. Code Yellow. Code Yellow meant dangerous wildlife activity. I hesitated, looking back at the ladder. Protocol demanded I report the structure, but something deeper warned against it. Instead, I marked the GPS coordinates in my personal phone and hurried back. At base, rangers had gathered around a map where Rivera was marking locations with red pins. 3 separate hikers reported the same thing, she explained. A man walking on all fours along the eastern ridge, moving faster than humanly possible through deep snow. In this weather? Someone asked. No one could survive exposure like that. Rivera's expression darkened. Exactly. Over the next week, strange incidents multiplied. Motion sensors triggered without visual confirmation. Trail cameras captured only static when they should have shown wildlife. 2 more backpacks appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, their contents untouched except for missing food. And the ladders. Always the ladders. I found 3 more during my patrols, each in locations impossible to reach without being seen, each with no surrounding tracks. I reported none of them. Instead, I began researching. The small ranger station library contained local history, and I discovered mentions of Akeshida's disappearance, how the Blackfeet warrior had pursued what local stories called the winter hunger that walks like a man into these same mountains. His final message, delivered by a half-frozen companion, warned of creatures that climb between worlds using trees as doorways. Local newspaper archives revealed a pattern. Every decade or so, a cluster of disappearances in the northern section of what would become Glacier National Park. The most recent had been in 2018, 3 backpackers who vanished during an early winter storm. Search parties found only a crude ladder leading into the canopy and a journal containing increasingly paranoid entries about being watched from above. One night in early December, I woke to scratching at my cabin window. Fine lines appeared in the frost, forming words I couldn't quite read from my bed. Heart pounding, I approached slowly, watching as invisible fingers etched into the delicate ice crystals. You climb. You see, you become. The scratching continued until the entire window was covered with the same message repeated dozens of times. Then silence. Dawn revealed no tracks in the snow outside, no evidence anyone had been there. That same day, Ranger Dawson announced his retirement, effective immediately. When I helped him load his truck, he pressed a small leather pouch into my hand. Blackfeet protection, he murmured. My grandmother made it. Hang it above your bed. Don't take it down for any reason, especially if you hear voices calling your name. I started to question him, but he cut me off. The Wendigo doesn't just eat flesh, it eats will, curiosity. It makes you hunger to know it, to find it, to join it. That's how it begins. How what begins? I asked. His eyes, suddenly clear and afraid, met mine. The transformation. He drove away that afternoon in the middle of a snowstorm. That night, my patrol took me past the first ladder I'd found. It had grown taller somehow, extending beyond where my flashlight could reach. The carvings had changed too, almost ready. As I stood contemplating what this meant, my radio produced only static, and my flashlight dimmed despite fresh batteries. The forest fell preternaturally silent. No wind, no animals, not even the sound of falling snow. Then came the clicking, surrounding me from all directions, perfectly synchronized like a language I almost understood. Between the rhythmic sounds, I heard what seemed like my name, whispered just beneath comprehension. Something pale moved between distant trees. Not one figure, but many, their elongated forms gliding through the darkness with impossible grace. They maintained their distance, a rough circle with me at its center, watching. My training evaporated. I ran, stumbling through snowdrifts, heading instinctively toward my cabin. The clicking followed, always maintaining the same distance, never closing in but never falling behind. Just as Lake Kintla came into view, the sound ceased abruptly. I burst through my cabin door, locked it, and hung Dawson's leather pouch above my bed with shaking hands. Inside my fireplace, embers glowed despite no fire having been lit before my departure. On my kitchen table sat a small pyramid of bones, too small for deer or elk, too large for squirrels or marmots. Human finger bones, arranged precisely, topped with a yellowed tooth. I should have left immediately. Any sane person would have. Instead, I photographed everything, packed essential supplies, and barricaded my bedroom door. That night, something circled my cabin for hours, its footsteps crunching in snow, occasionally testing windows and doors with gentle pressure. Just before dawn, it spoke, a voice like wind through dead leaves. Hunger teaches patience. We have waited centuries. We can wait for you. When morning broke, I found 5 ladders surrounding my cabin, each pointing toward my bedroom window, each carved with a single word that together read, "The climb calls you home." December brought the darkness. At this latitude, daylight dwindled to precious few hours, and storms frequently obscured even those brief moments of sun. The park transformed into a realm of shadows and whispering snow, the mountains disappearing for days behind curtains of white. I'd taken to sleeping in 2-hour increments, afraid to surrender fully to unconsciousness. Dark circles formed beneath my eyes, and fellow rangers commented on my haggard appearance. I deflected their concerns with mentions of insomnia, the truth that something watched me through my windows every night, that ladders continued appearing around my cabin with increasing frequency, that the clicking sounds had begun to form patterns I was horrifyingly close to understanding, seemed impossible to share. Rivera assigned me exclusively to daylight patrols, though she never explained why. The northern trails are off limits after 3 p.m., she instructed. No exceptions. I obeyed during official hours. But my growing obsession drove me to conduct my own patrols after dark, unauthorized and alone, searching for answers I both craved and dreaded. The day that changed everything began ordinarily enough. I checked the remote cameras along Trail 6, replaced weather monitoring equipment, and assisted a research team collecting snowpack data. As 3 p.m. approached, the researchers departed, leaving me alone at the 5-mile marker as fat snowflakes began falling. I should have turned back. Instead, I continued north, toward where I'd found the first ladder weeks before. The storm intensified rapidly, visibility dropping to mere feet, the world reduced to swirling white. Navigation became impossible, even with GPS that kept losing signal. By nightfall, I was officially lost. My radio produced only static, my flashlight beam couldn't penetrate the blizzard, and the temperature plummeted to dangerous levels. Hypothermia would kill me within hours without shelter. That's when I found the cave. It appeared suddenly through the whiteout. A dark opening in a rock face I didn't recognize from any park map. Desperate, I stumbled inside. The entrance was narrow but opened into a spacious interior where the howling wind couldn't reach. My flashlight revealed ancient pictographs covering the walls, crude human figures with elongated limbs, trees with ladder-like marks, and what appeared to be hunting scenes, though it wasn't clear which were the hunters and which the hunted. At the cave's center stood a stone cairn approximately 4 feet tall. Atop it rested a bundle wrapped in what looked like animal hide, yellowed with age. Against all protocol and common sense, I approached and unwrapped it. Inside, a journal bound in leather so old it crumbled at my touch. The first legible page contained a single sentence in faded ink: "They are not what they appear to be." The handwriting matched the journal I'd found in my cabin months ago. As I turned pages carefully, I pieced together a fragmented narrative. The journal belonged to a ranger from 1978 who had investigated disappearances similar to those I'd been researching. He had followed the ladders, climbed high into the canopy, and witnessed something that broke his understanding of reality. The final pages contained increasingly frantic entries. They exist between states. Not alive as we understand it, not dead, but hungry always. They require vessels. They call it transcendence. The ladders are invitations. The clicking is language. The hunger is transformation. I can feel myself changing. My fingers elongate when I sleep. Food tastes like ash. Only the thought of the climb brings saliva to my mouth. The final entry, dated December 21, 1978, read simply, "Winter solstice, the longest night. They come for those who've shown interest. I've hidden this record for whoever follows. If you're reading this, they're already watching you. They've been watching me climb their ladders, test their thresholds. Tonight I become. May whatever God exists forgive me." The journal ended there. With shaking hands, I rewrapped it and backed away from the cairn, suddenly aware of how quiet the cave had become. The storm outside had ceased abruptly, unnaturally. In that silence, the clicking began, emanating from deeper within the cave where my flashlight couldn't reach. I ran. The cave entrance opened onto a landscape transformed. The blizzard had stopped, replaced by clear, star-filled sky and full moon illuminating endless white. I recognized nothing. The landmarks, the mountain silhouettes, all wrong, all different. Either I had traveled much farther than possible, or I wasn't in Glacier National Park anymore. In the moonlight, I saw them clearly for the first time. Dozens of them standing motionless among distant trees. Impossibly tall, impossibly thin humanoid figures with limbs that bent at wrong angles. Their skin gleamed pale as the snow, stretched too tight over elongated frames. Where faces should be, only shadows and suggestions of sunken features. And they were all looking at me. One stepped forward, moving with a fluid grace that defied its awkward proportions. It stopped 30 yards away, tilted its featureless head, and spoke in a voice like cracking ice. Hunger recognizes hunger. My denial crumbled as I realized the terrible truth. I hadn't been stalking these creatures through the park. They had been guiding me, step by step, ladder by ladder, curiosity by curiosity, toward this moment. "What do you want?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. The creature's response came not in words but in sensations that bloomed directly in my mind. Images of endless winter forests, of climbing higher and higher through ancient trees, of transcending physical limitations, of a hunger so profound it became purpose. "We want what all teachers want," it finally said aloud. "A worthy student." It extended one impossible arm, fingers too numerous and too long unfolding like pale spider legs. "The transformation requires consent. The hunger must be embraced." In that moment I felt it. A gnawing emptiness inside me that had nothing to do with food, an existential hunger that had driven me from my city life to this wilderness, that had kept me here despite the warnings, that had pulled me irresistibly toward the ladders and the mysteries they represented. "If I refuse?" I managed to ask. The creature's non-face rippled in what might have been amusement. "Then you return, live your brief, limited existence, die your ordinary death." It gestured toward a gap in the trees where, impossibly, I could see the lights of the ranger station miles away. "The door remains open to those who've glimpsed beyond. For now." My feet carried me backward, toward those distant lights. The creatures made no move to follow, but their collective attention pressed against my mind like a physical weight. As I reached the tree line, the tall one called out one final time, "The ladders remain, the hunger remains, we are patient." I ran through snow that should have been impassable, driven by terror and something else, a hunger to escape, to understand, to return to normal life. After what seemed like hours, but could have been minutes, I stumbled into the ranger station parking lot, collapsing at the steps. Rivera found me there, nearly frozen. As they carried me inside, her expression wasn't surprised, just resigned. "You went north after dark," she said. Not a question. "What are they?" I whispered through chattering teeth. She looked away. "Legends say they were once human. Blackfeet stories call them the winter-hungry ones. Scientists who've glimpsed them propose interdimensional travelers. Hikers who've encountered them rarely speak again." She paused. "Those who do call them Wendigo, though they're not quite that either." "They offered me transformation," I admitted. Rivera's face paled. "Then you must leave. Today. Those they extend invitations to either go to them willingly or—" She couldn't finish. "Or they come for you," I thought, remembering the journal's final entry. Within hours, I was packed and driving south, away from Glacier National Park, away from the ladders and clicking and pale watchers in the trees. But the hunger came with me. I rented a small apartment in Missoula, 3 hours south of Glacier. Distance brought no peace. The clicking sounds followed, fainter but persistent, coming from inside my walls at night. I'd wake to find frost patterns on my bedroom window, spelling out the same message over and over. "Theod ladder waits." Sleep became my enemy. In dreams, I climbed endless wooden rungs into darkness while elongated figures watched from above, their clicking speech gradually resolving into almost comprehensible words. I'd wake gasping, my fingers stretched painfully, bones aching as if trying to extend beyond their natural length. Twice I packed my car, intending to drive further south, perhaps all the way to Arizona or New Mexico, where ancient forests gave way to deserts. Both times, I found myself unconsciously driving north instead, stopping only when I recognized road signs pointing toward Glacier. The hunger grew. Food lost its taste. I dropped 20 pounds in 3 weeks. My only appetite was for information. Anything connected to what I'd experienced. I became a regular at the University of Montana's library, poring through anthropological records of indigenous accounts, frontier journals, Park Service incident reports. I created a massive timeline on my apartment wall, connecting disappearances, sightings, and unexplained phenomena across 2 centuries. Patterns emerged. The entities, whatever they were, operated in cycles tied to celestial events. Winter solstice marked their most active period. Their interactions with humans followed a progression: observation, invitation, often through dreams or symbolic structures, revelation, and finally transformation or disappearance. Most importantly, I discovered I wasn't alone. Others had encountered them and survived, at least temporarily. Through obscure online forums and message boards, I connected with 3 others who described similar experiences in wilderness areas across North America. Morgan, a former wilderness guide from Olympic National Park, had found ladders in 2019 and spent 2 years running before giving in to the climb. Her last message described feeling more myself than ever before just before her accounts went permanently silent. Hiroshi, a wildlife photographer, had captured actual images of the entities in Banff National Park. The photos showed exactly what I'd seen: impossible, elongated figures with too many joints. He'd wired me copies before apparently committing himself to a psychiatric facility. Chen, a biologist studying alpine ecosystems, provided the most valuable information. Her team had collected tissue samples after an encounter, pale, translucent material left behind on a tree where one of the creatures had been observed. Laboratory analysis showed cellular structures unlike any known organism, with evidence of both plant and animal characteristics plus something else entirely. "They exist partially outside our dimension," Chen theorized during our encrypted video call. Her face looked gaunt, her movements twitchy. They need human catalysts to fully manifest here. The transformation isn't consumption, it's collaboration. Symbiosis. Have you seen the ladders? I asked. Her expression tightened. I've climbed them. How far? Far enough to know I'll eventually climb to the top. She leaned closer to her camera. The hunger isn't just theirs. It's always been in us. The desire to transcend our limitations, to become something beyond human. They simply recognize it and offer a path. Chen disappeared 3 days after our conversation. Her research materials arrived at my apartment by courier the following week, with no explanation of how she knew my address. Among her papers, I found a map marking locations across North America where encounters had been documented. Glacier National Park contained the highest concentration by far, with my former patrol area at its epicenter. Winter solstice approached, December 21st, just like the date in the Cave Journal's final entry. My dreams intensified. In them, I now stood at the top of the tallest ladder, looking down at my human self from above, feeling nothing but pity for the limited creature I'd once been. I began to understand the clicking language, both in dreams and during waking hours, when it emerged from my heating vents, water pipes, and the spaces between floorboards. It described a process: cellular restructuring, sensory enhancement, consciousness expansion in terms simultaneously scientific and mystical. Hunger is the beginning of transformation, it explained. Hunger focuses intention. Hunger reveals truth. On December 18th, I woke to find my sheets torn by my own hands, which had stretched during the night. Fingers now visibly longer, joints more pronounced. I could no longer deny what was happening. The transformation had begun despite my absence from Glacier, despite never having accepted their offer. Chen's research offered one possible explanation. Proximity to the entities created permanent changes to human DNA, activating dormant genetic potential. The choice wasn't whether transformation would occur, but whether it would complete naturally or be violently accelerated through direct contact. I called Rivera at the ranger station, desperate for guidance. "You need to come back," she said after a long silence. "Those who resist the change suffer far worse than those who surrender to it." "You knew about this all along," I accused. "It's why we have the northern area restrictions. It's why we rotate staff regularly. It's why we don't report certain findings." Her voice softened. "The Park Service has a containment protocol. The entities stay primarily within Glacier's boundaries as long as we provide opportunities for connection." "You feed them people," I whispered in horror. "No. We allow those already called to answer." "There's a difference." She paused. "The winter solstice convergence happens tomorrow night. If you're going to come back, it needs to be then. After that, the change becomes irreversible and eventually fatal if not completed properly." I hung up without answering. Within an hour, I'd packed minimal supplies and was driving north through a gathering snowstorm, drawn by a hunger stronger than fear, stronger than self-preservation. As I crossed into Glacier National Park boundaries near midnight, the clicking sounds inside my head synchronized perfectly with my heartbeat. Through the windshield, I watched pale figures flit between trees along the roadside, keeping pace with my vehicle effortlessly. At the ranger station, Rivera waited alone, her expression a mixture of resignation and relief. "The others have gone. Safety protocol during convergence." She handed me a park radio and a map with a location marked in red. "This is where you need to be at midnight tomorrow, the primary convergence point. The ladder there reaches farther than any other." "What happens if I go there?" I asked, though I already knew. "You complete what has already begun." She nodded toward my hands, which I'd hidden in gloves despite the warmth of the building. "Or you fight it and become something trapped between states, neither human nor transcended. Those are the ones we eventually have to hunt down." She showed me personnel files of rangers who had undergone the transformation over decades, dozens who had retired suddenly or transferred without notice. Some photos showed subtle changes progressing over months, lengthening features, thinning frames, eyes growing more deeply set. "Some return after," Rivera said enigmatically. "Changed but still themselves enough to serve as intermediaries. They help maintain the balance, keep the entities contained within the park boundaries." I finally understood her strange manner, her knowing looks. Rivera was one of them, partially transformed, serving two worlds. "How long have you been between?" I asked. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing an arm too long for her frame, with an extra joint between elbow and wrist. 12 years. Winter solstice, 2013. "Does it hurt?" "Only when I pretend to be fully human." Her smile revealed teeth too numerous, too sharp. "The hunger never completely fades, but it becomes manageable." That night, I returned to my old cabin at North Ridge. Lake Kintla stretched frozen before it, the mountains looming black against the star-filled sky. Inside, everything remained as I'd left it months ago, with one exception. A new ladder had been constructed in the center of the living room, extending up through a hole cut perfectly in the ceiling, continuing through the roof toward the night sky. On my bed lay a journal identical to the one I'd found in the cave. Inside, blank pages waited except for a single line on the first page. Record your transformation for those who follow. I began to write. Winter solstice arrived with unnatural stillness. No wind disturbed the pines, no animals moved through the deep snow, no clouds crossed the crystal blue sky. Even the air felt suspended, as if the entire park held its breath in anticipation. I hadn't slept. My transformation accelerated through the night, fingers now fully 2 inches longer than normal, joints reconfiguring painfully, skin stretching and paling until blue veins showed prominently beneath. My reflection revealed sunken cheeks and enlarged eyes, with pupils that had expanded to nearly eliminate the iris. Most disturbing was my new perception. I could sense the park in ways impossible to describe. Layers of reality overlapping like transparent sheets. Vibrations from distant movements. Echoes of past events imprinted on the landscape. The clicking language now made perfect sense. Complex concepts transmitted through simple rhythmic patterns. The hunger had become unbearable, not for food but for completion. Every cell in my altered body strained toward the convergence point marked on Rivera's map. A remote clearing 6 miles north of my cabin, accessible only by a trail that didn't appear on official park maps. Before departing, I finished my journal entry, detailing everything I'd learned for whoever might find themselves on this same path. I included Chen's research, notes on the transformation process, and warnings about the point of no return. Whether I left it as cautionary tale or recruitment tool, I couldn't say. The sun began its brief winter arc as I set out, snowshoes strapped to boots that barely fit my elongating feet. Though the temperature registered well below freezing, I felt no cold. My uniform hung loosely on my thinning frame, which had shed nearly 40 pounds since my first encounter. The unmarked trail revealed itself to my enhanced perception, not as a physical path but as a current of energy flowing through the forest, visible as subtle blue luminescence against the white snow. I followed it effortlessly, moving with new grace despite my awkward proportions. Halfway to the convergence point, I encountered the first of them, a fully transformed entity waiting motionless beside a massive pine. Up close, without fear clouding my perception, I could see the vestigial human features beneath its alien appearance, the suggestion of a nose, the remnants of lips, eyes deep set but unmistakably conscious and intelligent. It made no sound, but understanding formed directly in my mind. The others wait, the circle prepares. The hunger culminates today. More appeared as I continued. Dozens of the entities standing sentinel along my route, each acknowledging me with slight movements of their 2 long limbs. Some seemed ancient, their forms refined beyond any human resemblance. Others retained more human aspects, their transformations more recent or incomplete. I recognized one. Its stance, the particular angle of its head, as Ranger Dawson, though no conventional human features remained to confirm this. It extended one elongated hand, offering a small carved token, a miniature wooden ladder. By noon I reached the convergence point. The clearing stood empty except for an enormous ladder at its center, crude yet somehow architectural, extending upward at least 60 feet to the lowest branches of an ancient pine, then continuing up through the canopy until lost from sight. Around its base, small objects had been arranged in a perfect circle: watches, rings, badges, car keys, wallets, personal effects of those who had climbed before me. The entities began to gather, emerging from the forest, to form a larger circle around the ladder. Their clicking communications built into a rhythmic chant that vibrated through the ground, through my altered body, synchronizing with my heartbeat and breathing. Rivera arrived last, moving with the fluid grace of one between states. The convergence only happens on winter solstice, she explained. Her voice changed, deeper, resonant with harmonics human vocal cords couldn't produce. The shortest day, the longest night, when the barrier between dimensions thins. What exactly am I becoming? I asked, my own voice similarly altered. Something that has always existed in human potential, she answered. The next evolutionary step, accelerated through connection with entities that exist across multiple realities. And what happens when I reach the top? Her expression shifted into something not quite a smile. Completion, understanding, Purpose. The sun touched the western mountains. The clicking intensified, now accompanied by a visible resonance, the air between trees shimmering like heat waves despite the cold. The ladder began to glow with the same blue luminescence I'd followed through the forest. Rivera nodded toward it. They came to this reality eons ago, but cannot fully manifest without human catalysts. Each transformation strengthens their presence, expands their influence. She placed my park ranger badge among the objects circling the ladder. You're not their prey, you're their bridge. As sunset faded into deepening blue twilight, I approached the ladder. Each rung hummed with energy as my elongated fingers wrapped around it. The first step upward sent waves of sensation through my transforming body. Pain and pleasure indistinguishable, cellular restructuring accelerating visibly as my limbs stretched further. Additional joints forming to facilitate the climb. 20 feet up, I passed through a layer of cold so intense it would have killed a human instantly. My altered physiology adapted immediately. Skin hardening, internal chemistry shifting. 40 feet up, at the lowest branches, gravity seemed to change orientation. I was no longer climbing up, but across, though the visual perspective remained vertical. The entities below had begun a slow, ritualistic movement around the ladder's base, their forms blurring as they accelerated beyond human perception. 60 feet up, the physical world began to fragment around me. I could see through gaps in reality, glimpses of other forests, other mountains, landscapes impossible to comprehend with human senses. The hunger drove me onward, each rung bringing clarity and purpose. I don't know how long I climbed. Time lost meaning, distance became subjective. The ladder extended beyond physical possibility, beyond the tallest trees, beyond what should have been the upper atmosphere. Still I climbed, driven by hunger and something new, a sense of homecoming. Near what felt like journey's end, I encountered others on the ladder, transformed beings climbing alongside me, above me, below me. Some I recognized as the missing hikers and rangers from my research. Others were clearly ancient, their forms perfected through centuries of existence between states. We acknowledged each other with the clicking language, sharing experiences, knowledge, perspectives impossible in human form. The top, when I finally reached it, wasn't a physical location but a state of perception, a vantage point from which I could see the true nature of reality. The entities weren't invaders or predators, but guardians of thresholds between dimensions, seekers of worthy collaborators who could help maintain the delicate balance between worlds. The hunger transformed into its true purpose, not consumption but perception, not destruction but creation. Through our union, new realities could form, new thresholds could open, new understanding could emerge. My final human thought, before consciousness expanded beyond individual identity, acknowledged the cosmic joke. What humans feared as monsters were simply those who had evolved beyond human limitations. The real horror was not in the transformation but in the resistance to it. The ranger who found this journal reported it as expected. The new recruit who receives it will feel the first stirrings of curiosity, then hunger. The cycle continues. In Glacier National Park, ladders appear in the deep woods where no human trail leads. Those drawn to them feel the hunger beginning, the desire to understand, to transcend, to climb beyond human limitation into something greater. The winter-hungry ones watch from the trees, clicking their ancient language, patient as the mountains themselves. They recognize hunger as the first step of transformation. They know curiosity leads to the ladder, and the ladder leads to becoming. Some nights when the moon is full and the air perfectly still, visitors to remote sections of the park report seeing impossibly tall, thin figures moving among distant trees. Rangers advise staying on marked trails. The hunger always finds those ready to evolve. The ladders always wait. The darkness among the trees became my office when I accepted the job as a park ranger. Glacier National Park in winter is a different world. A realm of pristine white contrasted against ancient pines, where the silence has texture and your breath hangs suspended in the frigid air. The locals call the northernmost section Akayatapiwa, an old Blackfoot word meaning the place of frozen spirits. Most visitors never venture there, even in summer. In winter, only park staff are permitted, and even then only when necessary. I wasn't supposed to be here. My assignment was meant to be temporary. 3 months at the visitor center while I figured out my next move after graduating with a forestry degree. But when Ranger Morrison went missing in December, the Park Service needed someone to cover his territory until spring. The pay was double, and I needed the money to finally clear my student loans. What I didn't know then was that Morrison was the third ranger to disappear from that sector in the past decade. Just routine patrols, Chief Ranger Bennett had assured me, his weathered face betraying nothing. Check the emergency cabins, monitor for unauthorized entries, and report any unusual wildlife activity. The terrain's challenging, but nothing you can't handle. They gave me a cabin near Lake Kintla, Ranger Outpost 7, far from the usual tourist areas. The one-room structure was simple but sturdy, with a wood stove, basic amenities, and a radio system that worked when the weather permitted. The isolation didn't bother me initially. I'd always been comfortable in solitude, finding peace in the whispers of the forest rather than human conversation. My first week passed uneventfully. I patrolled my assigned routes, maintaining the cross-country ski trails and checking the motion sensor cameras set up for wildlife research. The days were short, the nights long, but I settled into a routine. I'd wake before dawn, patrol until dusk, then return to my cabin to log my findings, eat, and read by lamplight until sleep came. It was during my second week that I found the first anomaly, tracks in the snow about 5 miles northeast of my cabin. They resembled elk prints but were oddly spaced, as if the creature had an irregular gait. When I followed them, they led to a frozen creek where they simply stopped. No crossing marks, no return path, they just ended at the ice. I photographed them, made notes, and reported it during my evening radio check-in. "Probably just an injured elk," Bennett responded, his voice crackling through static. "Mark it on your map and we'll have wildlife take a look when conditions improve." That night the temperature dropped to -20. I stoked the fire before crawling into my sleeping bag, listening to the wood pop and crack in the stove. Sleep came quickly, but sometime in the deepest part of night I jolted awake. Something was outside my cabin. The sound was subtle at first. A soft scraping against the outer wall. It could have been a branch moved by wind, except there was no wind that night. The forest stood frozen in perfect stillness. I listened, barely breathing, as the scraping moved methodically around the perimeter of the cabin. When it reached the window, I heard another sound, a wet, clicking noise, like someone rapidly tapping their tongue against the roof of their mouth. I lay motionless, my heart hammering against my ribs. The logical part of my brain suggested a deer or elk investigating the cabin, common enough behavior, but something more primal rejected this explanation. I reached for my flashlight, my hand trembling slightly. The scratching stopped. For several long seconds, silence pressed against my ears. Then a sharp crack, like a breaking branch, sounded from the direction of the lake, followed by the distant sound of ice fracturing. I didn't sleep again that night. At first light I investigated. Fresh tracks surrounded my cabin, the same unusual elk-like prints I'd found before, but these weren't made by any elk. The stride was too long, the impression too deep. What disturbed me most was how they approached the cabin from the forest, circled it completely, then led directly to the lake where they vanished at the shoreline. I radioed it in, trying to keep my voice casual as I described the tracks. "Sounds like you've got yourself a case of the Kintla creeper," Bennett chuckled, using the nickname local rangers had for a particularly large mountain lion that occasionally passed through the area. "Nothing to worry about, just keep your sidearm handy." But Bennett hadn't seen the tracks, hadn't heard that clicking sound. Over the next few days I found more anomalies. Trees with bark stripped at impossible heights, animal carcasses arranged in circular patterns, and once, a set of antlers lodged high in a pine's branches 20 feet above ground. I documented everything meticulously, though I began to keep certain details to myself during check-ins. Something told me that dwelling too much on these oddities would get me pulled from my assignment, labeled as another ranger who couldn't handle the isolation. Then came the worst storm of the season, burying the region under 3 feet of fresh snow. Park operations suspended all non-essential activities, and I was instructed to remain at the cabin until conditions improved. For 2 days, I watched the world disappear under endless white. My radio picked up nothing but static. I was completely alone. On the third night, as the storm finally abated, I heard a sound that froze my blood. A long, keening wail that seemed to rise from the lake itself. It wasn't a wolf or any animal I recognized. It was almost human, yet fundamentally wrong. Like a voice trying to remember how to form sounds after centuries of silence. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, my palms slick with sweat despite the cold. Logic told me to stay inside, but I'd been trained to investigate unusual occurrences. I stepped onto my porch, the beam of my flashlight cutting through darkness. The night was crystalline, stars emerging as the storm clouds receded. The fresh snow reflected moonlight, creating an eerie blue glow across the landscape. I swept my light toward the lake and caught a glimpse of movement at the tree line. Something was watching me from between the pines. It stood upright but hunched, taller than a man. I couldn't make out details, just a dark silhouette against the snow. As my light found it, the figure retreated deeper into the trees, not rushing but moving with deliberate purpose. The wail came again, this time from behind me, though I'd swear the figure I'd seen never opened what might have been its mouth. I backed into my cabin, locked the door, and spent the night with my rifle across my lap, the radio hissing useless static beside me. In the morning, I found a carcass on my porch. A half-eaten deer, its ribcage splayed open like hands in prayer. Most of the meat was gone, but the organs remained untouched. The snow around it showed those same strange tracks, but they led in a circle around my cabin before vanishing again at the lakeshore. I knew then that something was hunting in my territory, something that wanted me to know it was there. After finding the deer carcass, I knew I needed more information. My weekly supply run to the ranger station provided the perfect opportunity to dig deeper without raising suspicions. The main station at West Glacier was quiet in winter, staffed by a skeleton crew who mostly monitored weather systems and coordinated with emergency services when necessary. Marcy, the station administrator, greeted me with her usual warmth when I arrived. "You're looking rough around the edges," she observed, pushing a cup of coffee across her desk. "Outpost 7 getting to you?" I forced a casual laugh. "Just winter blues. The isolation's an adjustment." I hesitated before adding, "Actually, I was hoping to check some of the wildlife records while I'm here. Been seeing some unusual patterns I'd like to cross-reference." If Marcy found my request strange, she didn't show it. "Archives are in the basement. Most recent 5 years are digitized. Anything older is still on paper. Help yourself, but try not to mention it to Bennett. He's funny about people accessing old reports." The basement archives were a labyrinth of metal shelving units filled with cardboard boxes labeled by year and subject. I started with wildlife incident reports from the past decade, looking for anything unusual around Lake Kintla or the northern boundary. Most were routine: bear encounters, elk migrations, occasional mountain lion sightings. Then I found a folder simply labeled "Unexplained Phenomena, Restricted." It wasn't sealed, though someone had written "internal use only" across the front in red marker. Inside were dozens of reports dating back nearly 70 years, all documenting unexplained occurrences in the park's northern region. I read about rangers hearing voices calling their names from empty forests, visitors claiming to see emaciated, impossibly tall figures stalking them through blizzards, hunting parties finding their game eviscerated and arranged in ritual-like patterns, teams of researchers experiencing collective hallucinations of hunger so intense they attacked each other before being rescued. Most disturbing were accounts of what local Blackfoot guides called Witiko or Wendigo, winter spirits said to possess humans and instill an insatiable hunger for flesh. According to the notes, incidents spiked during particularly harsh winters, especially in areas around Lake Kintla and the Akatapiwa region. I photographed as many documents as I could with my phone, knowing Bennett would never authorize me accessing these files. One report from 1978 caught my attention. A ranger named Howard Blackwell had documented ongoing encounters with what he described as a deer-like entity of impossible proportions near Outpost 7. His final entry, dated February 18, simply read, "It's speaking to me now," using Michelle's voice. But Michelle has been dead for 3 years. Blackwell was found 2 weeks later, frozen to death on the shore of Lake Kintla, his body partially consumed. The ranger who disappeared before me, Morrison, had submitted a report just 2 days before he went missing. He described finding ladders made of bone and sinew standing upright in the forest, leading nowhere. Search parties never found these structures, and Morrison's disappearance was officially attributed to an avalanche, though his body was never recovered. As I was replacing the files, I noticed a small leather-bound journal wedged behind one of the boxes. It had no official markings, just a name embossed on the cover: Catherine Shaw, 1932. I opened it and discovered the private diary of one of the park's first female rangers. Shaw's entries began professionally enough, describing weather patterns and wildlife sightings. By midwinter, her writings became increasingly disturbed. She wrote about hearing whispers in the forest, about feeling watched whenever she approached the lake. In her final entry, dated March 6, 1932, Shaw wrote, "The hunger calls to me each night now. Not my hunger, ATS hunger. It waits across the lake, patient as the mountains themselves. The Blackfoot were right to fear this place in winter. What walks here is older than their legends, older than the forests. I've seen it watching from between the trees, antlers rising like dead branches against the sky, body thin as famine. When it moves, it leaves no footprints, only the scent of decay. I know now why it's been calling me. It wants to wear my skin when mine has failed. I will not let it take me. Better to end things on my terms. Shaw's body was found in her cabin, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The official record listed her death as suicide due to isolation-induced psychosis. I was so engrossed in these discoveries that I didn't hear Bennett approach until his hand fell on my shoulder. "Find what you're looking for?" His voice was casual, but his eyes were hard as he glanced at the files spread before me. I forced myself to remain calm. "Just some background on local wildlife. Thought it might help me identify unusual tracks." Bennett's gaze lingered on Shaw's journal, which I'd failed to hide. "That's restricted material," he said quietly. "Not meant for seasonal staff." "Sorry, I was just curious." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Curiosity's natural. But some things in this park are better left unexamined. The northern boundary has always been temperamental, especially in winter. I nodded, gathering my notes. "I'll stick to my assigned duties." "See that you do." Bennett helped me return the files, his movements methodical. Strange things happen in isolated places. The mind plays tricks. Best to focus on what's real, your patrols, your reports. Don't go looking for explanations to every odd sound or shadow. As I prepared to leave, Bennett added casually, "You know, we've had rangers request transfers from Outpost 7 before. No shame in it if you're finding it too isolated." "I'm fine," I insisted, perhaps too quickly. "Just getting my bearings." Bennett nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. "Weather Service is predicting another system moving in tonight. Heavy snow, possibly whiteout conditions. I'd head back now if you want to beat it." The drive back to my outpost was tense, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. The historical accounts matched what I'd been experiencing. The strange tracks, the sounds at night, the feeling of being watched. I wasn't imagining things, and I wasn't the first to encounter them. As predicted, the storm hit just as I reached my cabin. Wind howled around the eaves, snow falling so thickly I could barely see the edge of the porch from my window. I secured the shutters, built up the fire, and spread my notes across the table. If the legends were true, if something called a Wendigo was stalking these forests, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. According to the Blackfoot legends I'd found, Wendigos were once human, transformed by acts of cannibalism during desperate winters. They became insatiable, their bodies elongating as their hunger grew, until they were monstrous parodies of humanity, all starvation and appetite with no satiation possible. But other accounts described them as ancient spirits that possessed the vulnerable, particularly those isolated and hungry during winter months. The more I read, the more I realized how perfectly my situation aligned with the traditional circumstances for Wendigo encounters: isolation, winter, wilderness. That night as the storm raged outside, I heard the scratching return, more insistent this time, accompanied by that wet clicking sound. But there was something new too, a voice, barely audible beneath the howling wind, calling my name in a familiar cadence. It sounded exactly like my father, who had died 2 years earlier. "I know you're not real," I whispered to the darkness. "I know what you are." The scratching stopped momentarily, then resumed with greater intensity. The voice changed, becoming a chorus of whispers, some pleading, others threatening. I covered my ears, but it made no difference. The voices seemed to be inside my head now. I felt a sudden, gnawing hunger unlike anything I'd experienced before, a hollowness that went beyond physical need. My hands shook as I clutched my rifle, fighting the urge to throw open the door and chase whatever waited in the storm. Instead, I forced myself to recite the emergency protocols I'd memorized during training, focusing on each word to drown out the whispers. By dawn, both the storm and the voices had subsided, leaving behind a transformed landscape buried under fresh snow. My radio crackled to life with Bennett's voice. "All outposts check in. Storm damage report." One by one, the other rangers responded. When my turn came, I hesitated before keying the mic. "Outpost 7 reporting. Minor snow damage to the north-facing side. All systems functional. No issues to report." I couldn't bring myself to mention the voices or my discoveries in the archives. Not yet, not until I understood what was happening and had evidence that couldn't be dismissed as stress or isolation-induced hallucinations. Outside my window, the morning sun glinted off the fresh snow, making the world look clean and innocent. But near the tree line, just visible through my binoculars, stood a single figure, tall and thin, its antlered silhouette stark against the white backdrop. It raised one elongated arm pointing directly at my cabin. Even from this distance, I could see what looked like a smile spreading across its too wide face. "I see you too," I whispered, raising my camera to capture proof of what I knew was watching me. The photograph showed nothing but trees and snow, the figure conspicuously absent despite my clear memory of seeing it. I'd checked and rechecked the image, zooming in until pixels blurred, but found no trace of the antlered watcher. Either my mind was fabricating visions or, more disturbingly, whatever stalked me couldn't be captured by conventional means. 2 more weeks passed with escalating incidents. The clicking sound circled my cabin nightly now, sometimes accompanied by mournful wails from the lake. Twice I woke to find crude symbols carved into my door, intricate spirals that matched drawings in Catherine Shaw's journal. Game cameras I'd set up along my patrol routes were either triggered by nothing or showed distorted images of what might have been a tall, emaciated figure moving between trees. I began losing weight despite maintaining my food intake. Sleep became elusive, my dreams populated by visions of endless hunger and frozen forests. Most alarming was my growing obsession with the lake. I found myself standing at its edge for hours, staring into its frozen surface as if expecting something to emerge. "You've been missing check-ins," Bennett's voice crackled through the radio one evening, concern evident despite the static. "Everything all right at Outpost 7? I hadn't realized I'd been skipping protocols." "Sorry, sir. Storm damaged the antenna. Had to make shift repairs." The lie came easily, though I knew the real reason. I'd been avoiding contact, afraid my voice might betray what I was experiencing. "We're sending a supply team your way tomorrow. Standard midwinter restock." His tone suggested this wasn't negotiable. "They'll check your equipment while they're there." After signing off, I spent hours organizing my cabin, hiding my research and notes about the Wendigo. Part of me wanted to confide in whoever came, to ask for help or transfer. But another part, growing stronger each day, felt possessive of my discoveries. This was my territory now. My hunt. The supply team arrived just after noon, 2 rangers I'd never met before, introducing themselves as Rivera and Kostova. They brought provisions, equipment parts, and mail, their casual conversation filling my cabin with normalcy that felt almost foreign after weeks of isolation. "Bennett asked us to check in on you specifically," Rivera mentioned while installing a new radio component. "Said you might be experiencing some adjustment issues." I bristled at the implication. "I'm fine, just focused on my work." Kostova, unpacking supplies at my table, paused at a folder I'd failed to hide. Photocopies of the Wendigo legends from the archives. "Interesting reading material," she remarked, her expression neutral. "The northern boundary has always had unusual folklore attached to it." "Just research," I said defensively. "Helps pass the time." They exchanged a glance I couldn't interpret before Rivera said, "There's a station tradition of testing new rangers with scary stories. Wendigo tales are favorites. Don't let them get to you." "We've all been where you are," Kostova added kindly. "The isolation plays tricks. If you need a break from Outpost 7, just say the word." I nodded, letting them believe I was simply another ranger spooked by solitude and legends. But as they prepared to leave, Rivera handed me a small leather pouch. "My grandmother was Blackfoot," he explained quietly. "This is for protection. Old ways still have power here." He seemed embarrassed by the gesture. Probably silly, but humor me. The pouch contained herbs with a pungent, almost medicinal scent. After they left, I hung it by my door, feeling both foolish and grateful. That night, for the first time in weeks, the sounds outside my cabin ceased entirely. The silence was more unnerving than the scratching had been. 2 days later, I found tracks in the snow leading from the lake directly to my cabin, not the unusual elk prints I'd documented before, but human footprints. They approached my door, then circled the cabin before returning to the lake. The stride length was impossible, nearly twice what a normal human could manage, and the impressions were unnaturally deep, as if whatever made them carried tremendous weight. I followed them back to the lake, my heart pounding as I approached the shoreline. Near the edge, the ice had been broken, a dark hole gaping like an open mouth. Around it, the snow was disturbed in a circular pattern, with strange markings scraped into the ice, similar to the symbols on my door but more complex. As I knelt to photograph them, I heard ice crack behind me. I turned to find a figure standing 20 yards away, tall and gaunt, its skin stretched tight over an elongated frame. Its head bore the partial remains of what might once have been antlers, now broken and malformed. But its face, God, its face was almost human, with sunken eyes that reflected nothing but hunger. I raised my rifle instinctively, but my hands shook so badly I couldn't aim. The creature made no move to approach, simply watching me with terrible patience. "What do you want?" I called, my voice thin in the winter air. It cocked its head, and when it spoke, the sound came not from its mouth but seemed to emanate from all around me. "To wear your hunger." I fired a warning shot that echoed across the frozen landscape. The figure didn't flinch, but when I blinked, it was gone, vanished as completely as if it had never been there. Only the footprints in the snow proved I hadn't imagined the encounter. Back at my cabin, I radioed Bennett with shaking hands, no longer caring how I sounded. "I need to report a..." I hesitated, then continued. "An aggressive wildlife encounter near Lake Kintla." Bennett's response was measured. "What kind of wildlife?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Possibly human, but wrong." It spoke to me. Silence stretched before he replied. "Repeat that last part." "It spoke," I insisted. "I have tracks, photographs, evidence." Another long pause. "I'm sending a team first thing tomorrow. Sit tight, keep your doors locked. Could be an illegal hunter or someone suffering from exposure. Don't approach if you see them again." I spent that night barricaded inside, Rivera's protection pouch clutched in one hand, rifle in the other. The wind picked up around midnight, carrying with it sounds that might have been words in a language I almost recognized. By dawn, I was exhausted but unharmed. The promised team never arrived. My radio calls went unanswered except for occasional bursts of static that resolved into whispering voices when I listened closely enough. I knew I should leave, hike out to the main road if necessary, but something kept me rooted to Outpost 7. A compulsion stronger than fear. On the 7th day of silence, I woke to find fresh snow had fallen, covering any tracks outside my cabin. My supplies were dwindling. I would need to venture out soon. As I checked my remaining provisions, I noticed something odd. My hunger had disappeared entirely, not diminished, but gone completely, replaced by a strange sense of lightness. That night the scratching returned, but it came from inside the walls now. A soft, persistent sound, like claws seeking entrance. The whispers returned too, no longer just my father's voice but a chorus of everyone I'd ever known, all calling me toward the lake. I found myself standing at the shoreline without remembering the journey there. The hole in the ice had grown larger, black water lapping at its edges. My reflection in the water was distorted. Too tall, too thin, my eyes sunken and ravenous. "I understand now," I said to the presence I could feel watching from the trees. "This isn't about hunger for food." The figure emerged slowly, moving with the careful precision of a predator approaching wounded prey. Up close, I could see how its limbs bent at unnatural angles, how its ribcage protruded through papery skin. Its eyes held recognition. It knew me as I now knew it. "The hunger never ends," it said, its voice clearer now. "But it can be shared." I nodded, understanding at last what had happened to Morrison, to Shaw, to all the others who had served at Outpost 7. They hadn't disappeared or died. They had transformed, becoming part of the Watcher in the woods, feeding the ancient appetite that could never be satisfied. "Is there no other way?" I asked, already knowing the answer. The creature extended one long-fingered hand. "Winter is long, the forest provides too little, we hunger together or perish alone." I hesitated at the edge of choice, the last fragments of my humanity crying out against what I was considering. Behind me lay civilization, help, normalcy. Before me stood ancient hunger incarnate, offering communion of the most terrible kind. The frozen lake cracked beneath us, a decision being forced. As the ice gave way, I reached out, not in surrender, but with purpose born of newfound understanding. When the spring thaw came, Ranger Bennett led the team that found my abandoned cabin at Outpost 7. My equipment remained, my journal documenting increasingly paranoid observations about noises in the night and creatures stalking the forest. My body was never recovered. The official report cited presumed death by misadventure or exposure, noting my deteriorating mental state and the harsh winter conditions. A new ranger was assigned to Outpost 7 the following winter, and Bennett made sure to include Rivera's protective pouch with the standard equipment. Sometimes, on particularly cold nights, rangers patrolling the northern boundary report hearing strange sounds from the direction of Lake Kintla, voices calling in the darkness, hungry and patient as the winter itself. Those who have served long enough know to turn back when they hear those calls. They know what waits among the trees, watching with hollow eyes and wearing a hunger older than the mountains themselves. For what walks in the frozen forests of Akayatapiwa was once human, as was I, and we are always hungry for company.